90% of children speak their first words before their second birthday. By age 3, most can form complete sentences. By 6, they chatter constantly about everything from dinosaurs to ice cream flavors, filling every silence with the beautiful chaos of childhood curiosity. On a rain-soaked Tuesday evening in November, 3 6-year-old children did none of those things. They sat perfectly still at table 7 in Lucia Rossetti's bistro, their small hands folded in their laps, their dark eyes tracking every movement in the upscale Italian restaurant with the calculating precision of security cameras. Not one sound escaped their lips, not a giggle, not a whisper, not even the unconscious hum that most children make while thinking. And watching them from behind the espresso machine was Sophia Chen, who had been serving tables for 16 hours straight and whose feet screamed inside her non-slip shoes, but whose tired eyes never missed a detail. The Torino family arrived every Tuesday at exactly 7:30. The father, Dominic Torino, wore suits that cost more than the restaurant's monthly rent, charcoal grey tonight, tailored to a terrifying perfection that somehow made his broad shoulders look like they could carry the weight of the world or crush it, depending on his mood. His children followed him like silent shadows. Marco, Isabella and Elena, identical in their expensive clothes and their absolute unnatural quiet. Sophia had been watching this ritual for 6 weeks now. The hostess, Patricia, would seat them at table 7 without being asked. The other servers would suddenly find urgent tasks in the kitchen or at the far end of the dining room. The children would order through pointing, 1 finger for water, 2 for juice, a small nod for yes, a tiny shake for no. Their father would speak for them in a voice like expensive whiskey, smooth and dark, with an edge that suggested it could burn going down. Tonight, Sophia decided she was tired of watching. The dinner rush was winding down, and the bistro's usual soundtrack of clinking wine glasses and murmured conversations had settled into a comfortable hum. Sophia balanced 3 plates of osso buco on her left arm and grabbed a pitcher of ice water with her right hand, her movements automatic after 8 years of restaurant work. She could carry 4 full meals and 2 beverages while calculating tips in her head and remembering that table 12 needed extra parmesan and table 4 was celebrating an anniversary. But as she passed table 7, something made her pause. Marco, the little boy with his father's dark hair but gentle eyes, was drawing on his napkin with a breadcrumb, not random scribbles, careful, deliberate lines that formed the shape of a house. Isabella, whose long black hair was braided with the kind of precision that spoke of expensive nannies, was arranging her peas into perfect rows like soldiers preparing for battle. Elena, the smallest of the 3, was building a tiny fortress out of dinner rolls, her movements methodical and defensive. They were playing. Silently, carefully, but they were playing. Sophia had grown up in enough foster homes to recognise the signs. These weren't developmentally delayed children or kids with autism who communicated differently. These were children who had learned that silence was survival. She made her decision in the space between one heartbeat and the next. "Excuse me," Sophia said, approaching table 7 with the kind of confident smile she usually reserved for her most difficult customers. "I couldn't help but notice Marco's artwork. That's a beautiful house." The temperature in the restaurant seemed to drop 10 degrees. Conversations at nearby tables faltered. Patricia, the hostess, actually dropped her reservation book. Dominic Torino looked up from his plate of veal marsala, and Sophia found herself staring into eyes the colour of dark coffee, the expensive kind, bitter and complex and impossible to read. For a moment that stretched like a held breath, he simply studied her. Sophia could feel his attention like a physical weight, cataloguing everything from her scuffed black shoes to the small stain on her apron where she'd splashed marinara sauce during the lunch rush. "He doesn't speak," Dominic said finally, his voice carrying a warning wrapped in silk. "I noticed," Sophia replied, and her tone was as steady as her hands as she set down the water pitcher. but his art speaks for him, don't you think? She turned to Marco, crouching down so they were eye level. The little boy's dark eyes widened, but he didn't pull away. You know, in my grandmother's house we have a saying, the most important conversations happen without words. Would you like to tell me about your house? Marco's eyes darted to his father, then back to Sophia. Slowly, carefully, he picked up another breadcrumb and added a chimney to his napkin house. Then he pointed to himself, then to his sisters, then to the small windows he'd drawn. 3 bedrooms, Sophia interpreted softly, 1 for each of you, and look. She pointed to a small circular shape near the front door. Is that a garden? Marco nodded, the first voluntary response he'd made to any adult outside his family in 6 weeks of Tuesday dinners. Isabella and Elena had stopped their own games, watching this unprecedented interaction with the fascination of children witnessing magic. Sophia caught their attention with a gentle smile. Isabella, those are the most perfectly organised peas I've ever seen. Are you practising to be a general? The little girl's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. And Elena, that's an excellent fortress. Very defensible. I approve. You approve? Dominic's voice held a note Sophia couldn't quite identify. Surprise, maybe, or something darker. I grew up building forts too, Sophia said, straightening but keeping her attention divided between the children and their father. Sometimes the world feels too big and too loud, so you build yourself something small and safe. Smart strategy. She picked up the water pitcher again, her movements casual, but her pulse was hammering against her throat. Can I get you anything else? More bread for the construction project? Maybe some crayons from the kids' menu? The silence stretched like a wire under tension. Sophia was acutely aware that every eye in the restaurant was now focused on table 7, that the other servers were probably taking bets on whether she'd still have a job in 5 minutes. But the children were looking at her with something she hadn't seen in their faces before. Hope. Crayons, Dominic said finally, and a fresh napkin for Marco. Of course. Sophia's smile was genuine now, warm and uncomplicated. I'll be right back. She turned to go, but Elena's small voice stopped her in her tracks. Wait. The single word fell into the restaurant's hush like a pebble into still water, sending ripples of shock through every nearby table. Elena immediately clapped both hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with something that might have been terror. Sophia turned back slowly, her heart racing. She looked at Elena, then at her siblings, who were staring at their sister with expressions of amazement and fear, then at Dominic, whose face had gone completely still. Yes, sweetheart, Sophia said, her voice as gentle as a lullaby. Elena lowered her hands slowly, looked at her father, then back at Sophia. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried clearly in the absolute silence of the restaurant. Blue crayons, please. The word please hung in the air like a small miracle. Dominic Torino's hands, Sophia noticed, were shaking as he reached for his wine glass. For just a moment his careful mask slipped, and Sophia saw something raw and desperate in his expression. Love, she realised. Fierce, protective, heartbroken love. Blue crayons, Sophia repeated, her own voice slightly thick. Coming right up. As she walked toward the hostess station, where Patricia kept the children's supplies, Sophia could feel Dominic's gaze following her every step. She could also feel the weight of what had just happened settling around her shoulders, like a cloak she hadn't asked for, but couldn't put down. Behind her, she heard Isabella whisper to her sister, "You talked! You really talked!" And Marco, in a voice like a rusty hinge finally moving, said, "Can I have red ones too?" Sophia gripped the edge of the hostess station to steady herself, her eyes burning with unshed tears. Patricia appeared beside her, face pale, hands trembling as she pulled a box of crayons from the drawer. "Sophia," Patricia whispered urgently, "do you have any idea who that man is?" "Someone whose children needed to remember how to ask for things," Sophia replied, taking the crayons. "That's all I need to know." But as she turned back toward table 7, where 3 small voices were now whispering together in what sounded like a conspiracy, and where Dominic Torino was watching her with the intensity of a predator who had just discovered something fascinating, Sophia knew that her answer wasn't entirely true. She was about to find out exactly who Dominic Torino was, and he was about to find out that the invisible waitress who had just given his children back their voices was far more than she appeared to be. The rain outside had stopped, but Sophia could feel a different kind of storm building, one that would change everything. She delivered the crayons with steady hands and a smile that didn't waver, even when Dominic leaned back in his chair and spoke her name for the first time. Sophia. Her name in his mouth sounded like a question and a promise wrapped together. What time do you get off work? 3 weeks later, Dr. Sarah Martinez sat in her child psychology office, staring at test results that defied every clinical model she knew. I need you to explain this to me again, she said, looking across her desk at Sophia and Dominic, because what I'm seeing in these assessments doesn't match any recovery pattern in my 30 years of practice. Sophia shifted in her chair, suddenly self-conscious. She'd been dreading this appointment, the formal evaluation that would determine whether the children's progress was sustainable, or if they were simply experiencing a temporary respite from their trauma. The children completed a full battery of cognitive, emotional and linguistic assessments, Dr. Martinez continued, flipping through pages of charts and graphs. Standardized tests, play therapy observations, family interaction evaluations. According to these results, Marco, Isabella and Elena are not just recovering from selective mutism, they're thriving at levels that exceed typical childhood development markers. She paused, her professional demeanour cracking slightly to reveal genuine amazement. Their emotional regulation scores are off the charts. Their communication skills have progressed from non-verbal to advanced multilingual competency. Their trust indicators show secure attachment patterns that usually take years to develop. Doctor, Martinez looked directly at Sophia. What exactly are you doing with these children? Sophia felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm not doing anything special, I'm just loving them. Miss Chen, Dr. Martinez said gently, love doesn't typically result in this kind of measurable therapeutic breakthrough. There's something else at work here. Dominic leaned forward, his voice carrying the protective edge that appeared whenever anyone questioned Sophia's methods. What are you suggesting, Doctor? I'm suggesting that Sophia has an intuitive understanding of childhood trauma that most trained professionals spend decades trying to develop. The techniques she's using, art integration, multilingual communication, trust building through shared vulnerability, these are cutting-edge therapeutic approaches that she's implementing without formal training. Sophia stared at the doctor. I was just doing what felt right for them. That's exactly my point. Doctor, Martinez smiled. You were meeting them where they were, instead of where textbooks said they should be. You treated their silence as communication rather than absence of communication. You used their interests and natural abilities as pathways to healing, instead of trying to force them into predetermined recovery models. She gestured to a particular chart that showed the children's progress over time. Look at this timeline. The breakthrough moments correspond directly to instances where you validated their emotions rather than trying to fix them. When Isabella hummed her mother's lullaby, you didn't make it into a therapy session. You simply acknowledged the beauty of the moment. When Marco wrote his first word in mashed potatoes, you didn't celebrate his achievement. You asked him what he wanted to say next. Sophia felt something warm unfold in her chest. She hadn't realized she'd been implementing specific therapeutic techniques. She'd just been following her instincts about what these particular children needed. There's something else, Dr. Martinez said, her tone shifting to something more personal. The children talked extensively about their experience during the home invasion 3 weeks ago. What they described doesn't sound like additional trauma, it sounds like empowerment. Sophia's stomach tightened. She and Dominic had been dreading this conversation. unsure how to explain that the children had witnessed violence and emerged stronger rather than more damaged. They describe feeling proud that they remembered their safety training, Dr. Martinez continued. They talk about Sophia's protective actions with admiration rather than fear. They understand that violence was used to protect them, not to harm them, and they've integrated that experience as evidence that the adults in their lives will keep them safe. Is that healthy? Sophia asked hesitantly. It's remarkably healthy, Doctor, Martinez replied. Children who have experienced trauma often develop hypervigilance and fear responses to any violence, even protective violence. The fact that your children can distinguish between aggression directed at them and aggression used to defend them shows extraordinary emotional sophistication. She closed the files and looked at both Sophia and Dominic with the expression of someone delivering verdict. My professional recommendation is that you continue exactly what you're doing. Sophia, whatever your background or training, you have a gift for helping traumatized children heal. These kids are not just recovered, they're stronger than they were before their trauma occurred. As they walked to the car after the appointment, Sophia felt a mixture of relief and bewilderment. She'd spent 3 weeks worrying that she'd somehow damaged the children by exposing them to violence, even protective violence. Instead, she'd apparently helped them develop resilience that exceeded normal childhood baselines. "You realize what this means," Dominic said as they settled into his Mercedes. "What?" "Dr. Martinez essentially told us that you're a natural therapeutic genius who accidentally revolutionized trauma treatment for children." His smile was soft, proud. "Though I could have told her that months ago." Sophia laughed. "I'm not a genius. I just paid attention to what they needed." "Which is exactly what makes you a genius." They drove to the children's new school, an exclusive private academy that had welcomed the Torino family despite, or perhaps because of, their reputation. The children had insisted on mainstream education rather than private tutoring, arguing that they wanted to meet other kids and show off their multilingual abilities. Sophia found them in the after-school art program, working on a collaborative project that covered an entire wall of the classroom. It was a mural depicting their family's story, the journey from silence to speech, from fear to safety, from broken to whole. "Sophia, Papa," Elena called out, waving a paintbrush covered in purple paint. "Come see what we made." The mural was extraordinary. It began with 3 small figures surrounded by darkness and silence, progressed through various scenes of art-making and word discovery, and culminated in a vibrant family portrait that included not just the 5 of them, but also Sophia's grandmother, the estate's chef Giuseppe, and even the memory of their mother Carmen, depicted as a guardian angel watching over the scene. "This section is when we learn to write in mashed potatoes," Marco explained, pointing to a detailed depiction of their breakthrough moment. "And this is when Sophia taught us Chinese characters. And this is when Papa realised he loved Sophia even though he was trying to hide it." "Marco!" Sophia laughed, her face heating. "You can't put that in your school art project." "Why not?" Isabella asked reasonably. "It's part of our story. Mrs. Patterson says art should tell the truth about our lives." Sophia looked at the mural more closely and realised that the children had created something remarkable. Not just a family history, but a testament to the power of chosen love, patient healing, and the kind of courage that came from believing you were worth saving. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It's not finished yet," Elena announced. "We're adding a wedding scene next week, with a white dress for you and happy tears for Papa and a cake that's both chocolate and vanilla." "And maybe a little baby sister section too," Isabella added, with the plotting expression Sophia had learned to both love and fear. "Isabella," Dominic said warningly, though his tone was more amused than stern. "What? Sophia's grandmother says that families grow when there's enough love to share. We have lots of love to share." Sophia felt tears prick at her eyes. These children had internalized the lesson that love multiplied rather than divided, that adding people to their family made everyone stronger rather than spreading their resources thinner. "We'll see about baby sisters," Sophia said diplomatically, "but first we have a wedding to plan. Speaking of which, did you finish your homework?" The children groaned in unison, but they began packing up their art supplies with good-natured compliance. As they gathered their backpacks and said goodbye to their teacher, Sophia marvelled at how normal this felt. The everyday routine of a family picking up children from school, discussing homework and dinner plans and weekend activities. 3 months ago, these children hadn't spoken a word. Now they were negotiating bedtime stories and arguing about whose turn it was to help with dinner and planning elaborate artistic projects that required weeks of collaboration. On the drive home, Marco asked the question that Sophia had been expecting but dreading. "Sophia, are you going to keep working with other kids who can't talk?" Sophia glanced at Dominic, unsure how to answer. Dr. Martinez had mentioned that several families had requested consultations after word spread about the Torino children's recovery. The idea of helping other traumatized children was appealing, but Sophia wasn't sure she was qualified for such responsibility. "Would you want me to?" she asked carefully. "Only if you promise that we're still your most important kids," Elena said seriously. "Always," Sophia replied without hesitation. "You three will always be my first priority, but if we could help other families find their voices too—" "That would be good," Isabella said thoughtfully. "Everyone deserves to have someone who listens to them." "Even kids who can't talk yet," Marco added, "because maybe they just need someone to show them that their words matter." Sophia felt her heart swell with pride. These children, who had spent 3 years locked in traumatic silence, were already thinking about how to help other children heal. They understood that their recovery was not just personal triumph, but potential blueprint for other families struggling with loss and fear. "We could call it the Carmen Foundation," Isabella said suddenly. "You know, to honour Mama. She always said that helping others was how we honour the people we love." "The Carmen Foundation," Dominic repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "I think your mother would be very proud of that idea." As they pulled into the estate's driveway, Sophia realised that Dr. Martinez had been right about one thing. They were definitely going to continue exactly what they were doing. Not just the art therapy and multilingual communication and trust-building exercises, but the fundamental approach that had made everything else possible, treating each other as family members worth fighting for, worth healing for, worth growing stronger for. Sophia looked at the man beside her and the 3 children chattering excitedly in the back seat about foundation logos and baby names, and whether the wedding cake should have 4 layers or 5, and understood that she had found something she hadn't known she was looking for. Not just a family, but a mission. Not just love, but purpose. Not just healing, but the kind of strength that came from turning personal triumph into service to others. The Carmen Foundation would help other families find their voices. But first, Sophia thought, as Elena launched into a detailed explanation of her latest drawing project, they had a wedding to plan and a life to build and 3 amazing children to continue raising into the kind of adults who believed that love was always worth the risk of speaking it out loud. "Sophia," Marco said as they walked toward the house, "do you think baby siblings would like art therapy too?" "Marco," Sophia laughed, "we haven't even had the wedding yet." "Details," he replied with a grin that reminded her exactly of his father. "We Torinos like to plan ahead." And as Sophia walked into the house that had become her home, surrounded by the voices that had become her greatest joy, she realised that some plans were too beautiful not to come true. 6 months after Vincent's betrayal, Sophia stood in the boardroom of Torino Construction wearing a charcoal grey suit that cost more than her grandmother's monthly medical expenses used to, addressing 12 men who controlled San Francisco's construction contracts with the calm authority of someone born to command. "The Rivera family dispute can be resolved through economic pressure rather than violence," she said, gesturing to the financial projections displayed on the room's massive screen. "They need our concrete suppliers for their new hotel project. A temporary supply shortage will cost them more than a territorial war would cost us, and everyone goes home to their families." Silence greeted her proposal. Sophia had grown accustomed to the pause that occurred when men who solved problems with bullets and threats encountered a woman who solved them with spreadsheets and strategic thinking. "You're suggesting we negotiate instead of retaliate," said Marcus Webb, Dominic's new security chief. His tone was respectful but sceptical. "I'm suggesting we win instead of fight," Sophia replied. "There's a difference." Around the table, expressions shifted from polite attention to genuine interest. These were men who understood victory, even when it came wrapped in profit margins rather than body counts. Dominic, seated at the head of the table, watched Sophia with the kind of pride that made her pulse quicken despite the professional setting. In 6 months, she had transformed from invisible waitress to equal partner, her strategic mind proving as valuable as any weapon in his arsenal. "The construction permits for the Rivera Hotel require City Council approval," Sophia continued. "Council member Patricia Huang owes us a favour from when we expedited the permit for her husband's restaurant renovation. A single phone call delays their approval by 3 months. By then, their investors will be pressuring them to make concessions." "And if they refuse to concede territory?" asked Thomas Benedetto, the family's longtime legal counsel. Sophia's smile was sharp, predatory. "Then we mentioned that their concrete foundation has structural irregularities that require re-inspection. I happen to know their inspector very well. He used to frequent Lucia Rossetti's bistro before the health department closure. He remembers feeling very sorry about that incident." The room erupted in appreciative laughter. Sophia had just outlined a strategy that would neutralize a territorial threat without firing a shot, using nothing but existing relationships and economic leverage. "Motion to approve Mrs. Torino's approach," Marcus said, and Sophia felt a warm thrill at the use of her married name, even though the wedding was still 3 weeks away. "Seconded," came a chorus of voices around the table. "All in favour?" Dominic asked, though his expression suggested the outcome was never in doubt. Unanimous approval. Sophia had just designed her first official strategic resolution for the Torino organisation, and it had been adopted without dissent. As the meeting dispersed, Dominic lingered behind with Sophia, his expression shifting from professional approval to personal satisfaction. "How does it feel," he asked, "to solve a problem that would have started a shooting war 6 months ago?" "Efficient," Sophia replied, "and considerably less expensive than replacing damaged personnel." "Personnel," Dominic repeated, moving closer to her. "I love it when you talk like a CEO." "I love it when you let me act like one." Their kiss was brief but heated, the kind of stolen moment that married couples learn to savour between boardroom meetings and school pickups. "Speaking of school pickups," Sophia said, glancing at her watch, "the children have their final rehearsal for the spring concert tonight. Isabella is convinced she's going to forget the words to her solo." "She's not going to forget," Dominic said confidently. "She's been practising in 3 languages for 2 months. That's what I told her, but she's 8. Logic is not her strongest suit." They walked to the elevator together, Sophia's heels clicking against the marble floor of the building that had become as familiar to her as the Torino estate. In 6 months, she had learned to navigate both worlds, the legitimate business operations that provided cover for less legitimate activities, and the domestic routines that kept 3 formerly silent children happy and thriving. The balance should have been impossible. Most people couldn't compartmentalize strategy sessions about territorial disputes and worry about whether Elena had finished her math homework. But Sophia had discovered that love made complex juggling acts feel natural. Her phone buzzed with a text from her grandmother. "Sophia, the children want to know if they can sleep over tonight to help with wedding preparations. I suspect they want to eat too much cake frosting and plan your honeymoon." Sophia showed the message to Dominic, who laughed. "Your grandmother spoils them worse than we do," he said. "She says it's her job as their great-grandmother, something about making up for lost time." The children's relationship with Lily Chen had been one of the unexpected joys of their expanded family. Sophia's grandmother had embraced her 3 new great-grandchildren with the fierce devotion that had sustained her through decades of hardship, and they had responded by learning Mandarin phrases specifically to make her laugh and creating artwork that decorated every surface of her apartment. "Let them stay," Dominic said. "We could use an evening to ourselves before the wedding chaos begins." Sophia smiled. The wedding preparations had taken on the complexity of a military operation, orchestrated primarily by 3 children who had very specific opinions about everything from flower arrangements to music selection. Tomorrow, their house would be invaded by florists, caterers, musicians, and various relatives who were travelling from across the country to witness Dominic Torino marry the woman who had given his children back their voices. The elevator reached the ground floor, and they walked toward the building's garage where Dominic's driver waited with the armoured Mercedes that had become Sophia's second office. She conducted conference calls during their commute, reviewed contracts while the children did homework in the back seat, and had learned to draft strategic memos while navigating San Francisco traffic. "There's something I wanted to discuss," Dominic said as they settled into the car's leather seats. The Carmen Foundation received its first official referral this morning. Sophia's attention sharpened. The foundation they had established in memory of the children's mother had been operating informally for 3 months, with Sophia consulting on cases involving childhood trauma and selective mutism. But this was their first official case through the proper channels. "Tell me," she said. 7-year-old boy, parents killed in a car accident 8 months ago, living with his grandmother, who's struggling with his complete withdrawal from communication. School says he hasn't spoken a word since the funeral." Sophia felt her heart clench. She recognised the pattern: trauma-induced silence, a child trying to protect himself by becoming invisible, well-meaning adults pushing for breakthroughs instead of creating space for healing. "What's his name?" "David Kim. His grandmother speaks limited English, and David was bilingual before the accident, Korean and English." "Like the children were with Italian and English," Sophia mused. "Multilingual kids sometimes retreat into one language or no language when they're processing trauma." "His grandmother specifically requested you. Apparently she heard about our family through her church, and someone told her about a woman who helped children find their voices through art." Sophia looked out the car window at San Francisco's familiar skyline, thinking about a 7-year-old boy who had lost his parents and his words in the same terrible accident. She thought about 3 children who had reclaimed their voices through patience and art, and the kind of safety that came from being seen and valued exactly as they were. "When can I meet him?" "Tomorrow afternoon, if you want, after the wedding rehearsal but before the dinner." "Perfect." Sophia squeezed Dominic's hand. "It feels right, you know, starting the foundation work right before we make our own family official." "Carmen would be proud," Dominic said softly. "She always believed that love multiplied when you shared it." As their car pulled up to the children's school, Sophia could see 3 small figures waiting by the main entrance, their faces bright with the kind of anticipation that came from having parents who showed up when they promised to. Marco was clutching his violin case, Isabella had her sheet music folder tucked under her arm, and Elena was bouncing on her toes with the restless energy of a 6-year-old who had important news to share. "Sophia, Papa!" Elena called as they emerged from the car. "Guess what happened today?" "What happened today?" Sophia asked, crouching down to Elena's eye level. "Mrs. Patterson says our family mural is going to be in the school's art exhibition next month, and people from other schools are going to come see it and learn about how families can help each other heal." Sophia felt tears prick at her eyes. The mural the children had created, depicting their journey from silence to speech, from broken to whole, was going to inspire other families struggling with trauma and loss. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," she said, pulling Elena into a hug. "And," Marco added, his violin case swinging as he gestured excitedly, "Mr. Rodriguez says our concert piece is good enough for the citywide competition. We might get to perform at the Symphony Hall." "All 3 of you?" Dominic asked. "All 3 of us," Isabella confirmed. "Marco on violin, me singing in 3 languages, and Elena playing the piano parts you taught her, Sophia." Sophia looked at these 3 children. formerly silent, now chattering about art exhibitions and musical performances and all the ways their voices were making the world a little brighter, and felt the kind of profound satisfaction that came from witnessing miracles in progress. "Come on," she said, ushering them toward the car. "We have a concert rehearsal to get to, and Nai is expecting you for a sleepover filled with cake frosting and wedding planning." "And baby name discussions," Elena added cheerfully. "Elena," Sophia laughed, "we've been married for exactly 0 days. We're not discussing baby names yet." "But we should be prepared," Isabella said reasonably. "Preparation is important for everything important." As they drove toward the school auditorium for rehearsal, Sophia listened to the children's excited chatter about their upcoming performances and realized that Dr. Martinez had been prophetic 6 months ago. They were definitely continuing exactly what they were doing. Not just the art therapy and strategic thinking and family love, but the fundamental approach that had made everything else possible, treating each voice as valuable, each person as worth saving, each family as capable of healing when given the right tools and enough patience. Tomorrow, Sophia would meet David Kim and begin the process of helping another child find his voice. Next week, she would officially become Sophia Chen Torino and add her name to a family that had chosen her as fiercely as she had chosen them. But tonight, she would sit in a school auditorium and listen to 3 formerly silent children fill the space with music and laughter and the kind of joy that only came from believing, truly believing, that their voices mattered. "Sophia," Marco said from the back seat, "when we win the competition, can we dedicate our performance to Mama Carmen and to you?" "To all the people who helped us find our voices," Isabella added. "And to families everywhere who are still looking for theirs," Elena finished. Sophia looked at Dominic, saw her own emotion reflected in his dark eyes, and understood that they were raising children who would change the world simply by believing that every voice deserved to be heard. "Yes," she said softly, "we can dedicate it to everyone who helped us remember that families aren't just born. They're chosen and fought for and loved into existence one word at a time." As they pulled into the school parking lot, Sophia realized that Isabella had been right about preparation being important. She had spent her whole life preparing for this moment, preparing to be the kind of person who could hear silence and know what it needed, who could take broken pieces and help them grow into something beautiful, who could love so fiercely that it became a force of nature, capable of healing trauma and building families and turning 3 silent children into advocates for every voiceless child in the world. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new families to help, new voices to nurture. But tonight was about celebrating how far they'd already come and the music they'd learned to make together. The San Francisco Children's Art Museum had never hosted a wedding before, but when 3 children decided that their chosen mother should be married surrounded by the artwork that chronicled their journey from silence to song, the museum's director found herself unable to refuse. Sophia stood in the museum's main gallery at sunset, her ivory silk dress catching the light that filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. The dress was Isabella's design. Simple, elegant, with sleeves that could be pushed up in case you need to cook or fight bad guys during the reception, according to Eleanor's practical amendments to the original concept. Around her, the gallery walls displayed 3 years of the Torino children's artwork. The progression was breathtaking, from dark, silent images created in the aftermath of trauma to bright, joyful pieces that celebrated family and healing and the kind of hope that could only come from children who had learned to trust the world again. "You look beautiful," said Lily Chen, adjusting the simple pearl necklace that had been her own wedding gift 70 years earlier. At 83, Sophia's grandmother moved slowly, but with the determined grace of a woman who had survived everything from war to widowhood and had no intention of missing her granddaughter's wedding day. "Nai, you didn't have to give me your pearls," Sophia said, touching the smooth stones at her throat. "Of course I did. They represent continuity, love that passes from one generation to the next, growing stronger with each sharing. Lily's eyes sparkled with satisfaction. Besides, they look perfect with the dress that Isabella designed, and the flowers that Marco arranged, and the music that Elena composed. This wedding is a collaboration by the people who love you most. Sophia looked around the gallery and felt her heart swell with the recognition that every detail had indeed been chosen by her family. The children had spent months planning this day with the obsessive attention to detail that only children possessed, and the result was a celebration that felt both elegant and joyful, formal and deeply personal. 5 minutes, called Giuseppe, the estate's chef who had appointed himself wedding coordinator, despite having no qualifications beyond his absolute devotion to the Torino family. The children are ready to begin. Through the gallery's archway, Sophia could see the ceremony space the children had created. Chairs arranged in concentric circles rather than traditional rows, because families should face each other, not all look in the same direction, according to Marco's reasoning. Flowers that combined Italian roses with Chinese peonies, representing both sides of their blended family. And at the altar, a display of artwork created by every child the Carmen Foundation had helped over the past 6 months. A visual testament to voices found and families healed. The music began. Not traditional wedding marches, but a song Isabella had composed specifically for this moment, performed by her siblings on piano and violin, while she sang lyrics in English, Italian and Mandarin that told the story of a waitress who became a mother, a father who learned to love again, and 3 children who found their voices by watching the adults in their lives choose each other every single day. Sophia walked down the aisle between seats filled with an eclectic gathering that reflected the complexity of their lives. Dominic's business associates sat beside teachers from the children's school. Federal agents who had helped clean up the Moretti aftermath chatted with social workers from the Carmen Foundation. Lily Chen held court in the front row, explaining Chinese wedding traditions to anyone who would listen. But Sophia's eyes were only for the man waiting for her at the altar. Dominic stood beside Father Martinez, the priest who had agreed to perform the ceremony, despite being slightly bewildered by the venue and the artwork, and the fact that the bride and groom had insisted on writing their own vows, in consultation with 3 children who had very specific ideas about what promises should be made. He wore a charcoal grey suit that matched the one Sophia had worn to her first business meeting 6 months ago, a deliberate choice that symbolised their equal partnership in all aspects of their shared life. His dark eyes were bright with unshed tears, and when Sophia reached his side, she could see her own overwhelming joy reflected in his face. "Dearly beloved," Father Martinez began, then paused as Elena's voice piped up from the front row. "Father Martinez, don't forget to mention that this is a family wedding, not just a grown-up wedding." Gentle laughter rippled through the gathered guests, and the priest smiled with the patience of someone who had been thoroughly coached by 3 determined children. "Of course, Elena, dearly beloved family and friends, we are gathered today not just to witness the marriage of Sophia and Dominic, but to celebrate the formation of a family that has been growing in love and strength for the past year." Sophia felt tears prick at her eyes. The children had insisted that the ceremony acknowledge what was already true, that their family had been real long before legal documents made it official. "The bride and groom have written their own vows," Father Martinez continued, "with input from the people who know them best." Dominic took Sophia's hands, his voice steady and sure as he spoke words that had been crafted in collaboration with 3 children who understood love better than most adults. "Sophia, you came into our lives when we were broken and silent, and you didn't try to fix us. You simply loved us exactly as we were, while believing we could become more than we imagined possible." His voice cracked slightly. "You gave my children back their voices, but more than that, you gave us hope. You gave us laughter. You gave us the kind of safety that comes from knowing that someone will fight for you, will choose you, will stand between you and danger without hesitation. He squeezed her hands gently. "I promise to love you with the same fierce protection you've shown our children. I promise to be your partner in building the kind of family that grows stronger by choosing to include more voices, more love, more healing. And I promise to cry happy tears at all appropriate moments, because Marco says that's what good husbands do." Laughter and applause filled the gallery, and Sophia heard Marco's delighted giggle from the audience. Now it was Sophia's turn, and she looked at the man who had transformed from dangerous stranger to beloved partner, surrounded by artwork that told their family's story, speaking words that had been shaped by 3 children who had taught her that love was always worth the risk of speaking it aloud. "Dominic, when I first met your children, I thought I was going to help them find their voices. Instead, they helped me find mine." Sophia's voice was clear and strong, carrying easily through the gallery. "You taught me that families aren't just born, they're chosen and fought for and loved into existence one brave word at a time." She looked toward the children, who were watching with the intense focus of wedding planners seeing their vision come to life. "I promise to love not just you, but the family we've created together. I promise to keep helping other families find their voices, because our children have taught me that healing multiplies when it's shared. I promise to make terrible jokes during serious moments, because Elena says that's what good wives do. And I promise to always remember that the most beautiful sound in the world is the sound of our children laughing together." Father Martinez smiled. "By the power vested in me, and with the enthusiastic approval of 3 very involved wedding planners, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Dominic, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle, joyful, and interrupted after approximately 3 seconds by Elena's voice calling out, "Now do the part where everyone throws flowers and we eat cake." As rose petals and rice flew through the air, a compromise between Italian and Chinese wedding traditions that had required extensive negotiation between the children and their great-grandmother. Sophia looked at the faces surrounding them and felt the profound satisfaction of a life that had found its purpose. The reception moved seamlessly into the museum's sculpture garden, where tables had been arranged among artwork created by children from around the world. The children's collaborative wedding cake stood at the centre, 4 layers alternating between chocolate and vanilla, decorated with sugar flowers that looked like the drawings from Isabella's early artwork, topped with figures that resembled their family, including a small representation of Carmen watching over them from above. "Speech! Speech!" called someone from the crowd, and Sophia found herself standing with a microphone in her hand, looking out at faces that represented every part of their complicated, beautiful life. "A year ago," she began, "I was a waitress who thought her job was to be invisible, to serve others without being noticed, to keep my head down and my voice quiet." She paused, looking at the children who were sitting at the head table with chocolate frosting on their faces and pure joy in their eyes. 3 children taught me that invisibility isn't safety. It's just another kind of silence. They taught me that love doesn't make you weak. It makes you willing to become stronger than you ever imagined possible." Sophia's voice grew stronger, carrying across the garden with the authority of someone who had learned to trust her own words. "Today, we're celebrating more than a wedding. We're celebrating the truth that families can be built from choice instead of circumstance, that healing is possible even after terrible loss, and that sometimes the most important conversations happen not with words, but with actions that prove love is worth every risk." She raised her champagne glass. "To Carmen Torino, whose love lives on in her children's voices, to every family still searching for their voice, and to the truth that some silences are worth breaking, and some sounds, like children's laughter, like promises made and kept, like the words 'I love you,' spoken without fear, are worth every fight it takes to preserve them." The toast was answered with applause and cheers, but Sophia's attention was captured by 3 small voices calling out in unison, "And to Sophia, who taught us that families are made of people who choose to hear you." As the evening settled into dancing and storytelling, and the kind of joyful chaos that came from bringing together everyone who had played a role in their unlikely family's formation, Sophia found herself in the museum's quiet corridor with Dominic, stealing a moment of privacy amid the celebration. "Any regrets?" he asked, pulling her close. Sophia looked through the doorway at the reception, where Isabella was teaching Sophia's grandmother a traditional Italian dance, while Marco provided violin accompaniment and Elena directed the entire production with the authority of a world-class conductor. Business associates were deep in conversation with art teachers. Former federal agents were comparing notes with social workers. Giuseppe was cutting cake with the precision of a surgeon while fielding questions about whether the frosting recipe could be adapted for lactose-intolerant children. "Just one," Sophia said, and Dominic's expression shifted to concern until she smiled. "I regret that it took me so long to realize that the best families are the ones you build yourself, one voice at a time." Dominic's kiss tasted like champagne and chocolate frosting, and the kind of happiness that came from promises kept and futures built on the solid foundation of love spoken aloud without fear. From the reception came the sound of children's laughter, adult conversation, and music that blended Italian melodies with Chinese rhythms, with the pure joy that could only come from a celebration where everyone present had been chosen with intention and loved without reservation. The silence was finally, completely joyfully broken, and in its place was the most beautiful sound Sophia had ever heard, the sound of family choosing each other every single day. What would you have done in Sophia's place, stayed invisible and safe, or risked everything to heal broken hearts? Drop a comment below and hit subscribe for more stories of love conquering impossible odds. The next tale will absolutely blow your mind. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days ago, the Torino children had witnessed their mother's murder. Dominic kept count because time had become the only measure of his failure. 762 specialists, therapists, and child psychologists had tried to unlock what trauma had sealed shut in his children's minds. Each appointment had been another small death, watching hope drain from their faces as adults with expensive degrees spoke to them like they were puzzles to be solved, rather than hearts that needed healing. The shooting had happened on a Tuesday. It always happened on Tuesdays in his nightmares. They'd been at Riverside Park for Isabella's 6th birthday picnic, the kind of normal family outing that Carmen had insisted on, despite his security team's protests. The children had been laughing, actually laughing as they fed ducks by the pond. Carmen had been braiding flowers into Eleanor's hair, her fingers gentle and patient as she wove daisies into dark strands. Then Vincent Moretti's men had opened fire from the tree line. Dominic had thrown himself over Carmen, but the bullets had already found their mark. Her blood had soaked into the picnic blanket, her last word a whispered "babies" as she reached toward their children, who were screaming behind the overturned picnic table where Dominic's bodyguard had shoved them. The screaming had lasted 37 seconds. The silence that followed had lasted 3 years. Now Dominic sat in his home office at 2 in the morning, staring at a background report on Sophia Chen that should have been routine, but read like a revelation. Born in San Francisco to parents who died in a car accident when she was 4, bounced through 7 foster homes before aging out of the system at 18. Perfect work record at 3 different restaurants, no criminal history, no debts except her grandmother's medical expenses. And buried in the social services files his people had accessed, a single note that made his hands shake. Subject exhibits selective mutism following placement disruptions, communicates primarily through written notes and drawings, recommend art therapy intervention. Sophia Chen had been a silent child too. His security chief, Marcus Webb, had delivered the report an hour ago with his usual efficiency. "Clean as they come, boss. Nothing suspicious. Just a working girl trying to keep her grandmother alive." What Marcus hadn't said, but what Dominic could read in the careful neutrality of his expression, was that Sophia Chen was nobody special, nobody worth the kind of attention that could get her killed. Marcus was wrong. Dominic touched the intercom button on his desk. "Bring the car around. I want to see where she lives." The drive to Sophia's apartment building took 23 minutes through San Francisco's rain-slicked streets. Chinatown after midnight was a different world, neon signs reflecting in puddles like fallen stars, the air heavy with the scent of incense and cooking oil from restaurants that never truly closed. Sophia's building was a narrow 3-story walk-up, sandwiched between a dim sum shop and a store that sold both groceries and lottery tickets. The kind of place where rent was paid weekly and dreams came with expiration dates. Dominic's armoured Mercedes looked obscene parked outside, but he'd stopped caring about subtlety the moment Elena had whispered, "Blue crayons, please," and remembered what her voice sounded like. Through the building's cracked glass door, he could see light coming from a second-floor window, 2:30 in the morning, and Sophia Chen was awake. He climbed the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway. The building smelled like 100 different dinners and the kind of industrial disinfectant that fought a losing battle against decades of wear. Door 2B had a brass number hanging at an angle and 3 different locks. The light under her door was steady, and he could hear something that made him pause. Humming. Sophia was humming a melody he didn't recognise, something soft and repetitive with the kind of rhythm that spoke of comfort and memory. There was a gentle tapping sound too, like pencil on paper. Dominic knocked. The humming stopped. Footsteps approached the door, light, cautious. He could imagine her checking the peephole, seeing a stranger in an expensive coat who had no business being in her hallway at this hour. "Sophia!" His voice was quiet, designed not to wake her neighbours. "It's Dominic Torino, from the restaurant." The silence stretched long enough that he wondered if she would pretend not to be home. Then the sound of locks being turned, one after another. The door opened 6 inches, held by a chain that wouldn't stop him if he wanted to get inside, but might slow him down long enough for her to scream. Sophia looked at him through the gap, and Dominic realised he'd never seen her without the controlled smile she wore at work. She looked younger, more vulnerable, and absolutely exhausted. "Mr. Torino!" She didn't sound surprised, which surprised him. "It's very late." "I know. May I come in?" "Why?" The directness caught him off guard. In his world, people didn't ask powerful men why. They opened doors and asked how high when he said jump and thanked him for the privilege. "Because my children spoke tonight," he said. "For the first time in 3 years, they used words instead of silence, and I need to understand why." Something shifted in her expression. The chain rattled as she unhooked it, and the door swung open. Sophia's apartment was exactly what he'd expected, and nothing like he'd imagined. Tiny, spotless, furnished with pieces that looked like they'd come from thrift stores and garage sales. But every surface was covered with drawings, hundreds of them, taped to walls, scattered across a card table that served as both dining room and desk, pinned to a corkboard above a miniature kitchen. Children's drawings. "You work with other kids," Dominic said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "Volunteer tutoring at the community centre." Sophia moved to the card table and began gathering up papers, her movements quick and defensive. Kids whose parents work nights and need somewhere safe to do homework. The drawings were remarkable, not just because of their technical skill, though some showed genuine artistic talent, but because of their progression. Dominic could see the chronological development, the way stick figures evolved into detailed portraits, the way angry scribbles softened into careful landscapes. "You use art therapy," he said, understanding flooding through him. "I use whatever works." Sophia's voice was careful, neutral. Some kids need to talk, some kids need to draw, some kids need both. She was still holding a stack of drawings, her fingers tight around the edges. Dominic could see one partially visible beneath the others, a self-portrait, unmistakably Sophia's work despite its childlike style. In it, a small figure with long black hair sat alone at a table covered with books, surrounded by empty chairs. "How long were you silent?" he asked. Sophia's hands stilled. For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she set the drawings down and looked at him directly, her dark eyes steady and unafraid. 2 years, from age 6 to 8, after my 4th foster placement fell through. She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of the card table. I stopped believing that words mattered. Nobody was listening anyway. What changed? Mrs. Patterson, foster mother number 5. She was an art teacher. Sophia's smile was small but genuine. She never asked me to talk. She just gave me paper and crayons and sat with me while I drew. Eventually I started writing words on the pictures. Then I started saying them out loud. Dominic felt something crack open in his chest, a painful mixture of hope and recognition. Your children aren't developmentally delayed. No. Sophia's voice was gentle but firm. They're protecting themselves. Silence is a fortress. It keeps the hurt out, but it keeps everything else out too. She moved to her kitchen, 2 steps from the card table, and began making tea with the automatic movements of ritual. The apartment was so small that Dominic could have reached from wall to wall with his arms spread, but Sophia moved through it with the grace of someone who had learned to make any space feel like home. "The children at the community centre," Dominic said, watching her measure loose tea into a ceramic pot that looked handmade. "Do their parents know what you do for them?" "Some do. Some don't need to know, as long as the kids are happy and their homework gets done." Steam rose from the kettle, and Sophia poured water over the tea leaves with practised precision. "There's a 13-year-old named Danny who hasn't spoken to his father since his mother died, but he draws me pictures of the conversations he wishes he could have, and there's Maria, who's 8 and draws the same house over and over, the one she lived in before her family had to move in with relatives." She poured tea into 2 mismatched mugs and offered one to Dominic. The ceramic was warm against his palms, and the tea smelled like jasmine and comfort. "Tonight," he said, when Elena asked for blue crayons, "that wasn't an accident." "No." Sophia settled into the single chair at her card table, leaving Dominic to lean against the kitchen counter. "Children know when they're safe. Elena felt safe enough to want something and brave enough to ask for it. That's a very big step. How do I keep them moving forward?" The question came out rougher than he'd intended, tinged with the desperation he'd been carrying for 3 years. Sophia studied his face over her tea mug, and Dominic had the unsettling feeling that she could see straight through all his carefully constructed defences. "You can't force healing," she said finally. "You can only create space for it. Safe space, consistent space, patient space." "I've tried to be patient." "Have you?" The challenge in her voice was gentle but unmistakable. "Or have you been patient with their silence while hoping every day that today would be the day they started talking again?" Dominic felt heat rise in his face. She was right, and they both knew it. Every morning for 3 years he'd looked at his children and searched their faces for signs of breakthrough. Every night he'd gone to bed counting another day of failure. "They feel your expectation," Sophia continued. "Children always do. The weight of your hope is another kind of pressure." "Then what do I do?" Sophia was quiet for a long moment, turning her tea mug in her hands. Outside, San Francisco was settling into its deepest sleep. But here, in this tiny apartment that smelled like jasmine and art supplies, Dominic felt more awake than he had in months. "You let them be who they are right now, not who they were before or who you want them to become," she said. "You meet them where they are, and you give them reasons to believe that their words, when they're ready to share them, will be welcomed rather than celebrated." "What's the difference?" "Celebration puts performance pressure on the gift. Welcome makes it safe to give more gifts when they're ready." Dominic drained his tea mug and set it on the counter, his mind racing. Everything Sophia had said made sense, but it required a fundamental shift in how he'd been approaching his children's recovery. Instead of waiting for them to return to who they'd been, he needed to help them become who they were meant to be now. "There's something else," Sophia said, and something in her tone made him look at her sharply. Your children aren't just healing from trauma, they're healing from grief. They lost their mother, but they also lost the version of themselves that existed before that loss. They can't go back to being those children. They can only grow into new ones. The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on getting his children back that he'd never considered they might need to become different children entirely. "How do you know all this?" he asked. Sophia's smile was sad and knowing. "Because I never became the child I was before my parents died. I became someone new, someone who understood that love doesn't have to be spoken to be real." Dominic checked his watch. 3:47 in the morning. In a few hours his children would wake up in their silent bedrooms, and he would have the chance to meet them exactly where they were instead of where he wanted them to be. "Thank you," he said, straightening away from the counter. "Mr. Torino." Sophia's voice stopped him at the door. "Your children spoke tonight because they felt safe. That safety came from you, from the way you let me interact with them without interfering, from the way you didn't make their words into a big production. They trust you. That's not something trauma can take away." As Dominic walked back down the narrow hallway toward the stairs, he realized that Sophia Chen hadn't just given his children permission to heal. She'd given him permission to let them. And tomorrow night he would return to Lucia Rossetti's bistro at exactly 7:30, not because it was their routine, but because his children deserved to know that some safe spaces could be counted on to stay safe. Behind him he could hear Sophia's door close and the sound of locks being turned. Then, faintly, the sound of humming began again, that same gentle melody that spoke of comfort and memory, and the kind of patience that could wait years for a single word. By the time Dominic reached his car, he had made a decision that would change everything. He was going to ask Sophia Chen to save his children's voices, and he suspected she was going to say yes. The yellow notice taped to Lucia Rossetti's front door fluttered in the morning wind like a surrender flag. Temporary closure by order of the San Francisco Department of Public Health. Violation of Code 114381, Food Storage and Preparation. Reopening pending reinspection and compliance review. Sophia stood on the sidewalk reading the words over and over, her workbag heavy on her shoulder, her mind struggling to process what her eyes were telling her. She'd left the restaurant 12 hours ago after the most extraordinary shift of her career. She'd returned expecting another ordinary Tuesday morning prep shift. Instead, she was staring at the end of her livelihood. Patricia emerged from the restaurant's interior, her face pale and her hands shaking as she locked the door behind her. The hostess, who never missed a detail, who could remember the preferences of 300 regular customers, looked lost and confused. "Sophia, thank God." Patricia's voice was thin, strained. "I've been calling everyone. The health inspector showed up at 6 this morning with a team of investigators. They found violations in our walk-in cooler that weren't there yesterday. I swear to you they weren't there." Sophia's stomach dropped. She'd been the last person to check the cooler before leaving last night. Temperature logs perfect, storage containers properly labelled, everything exactly as it should be. She'd signed off on the checklist herself. What kind of violations? Cross-contamination, expired products, temperature abuse. Patricia's laugh was bitter, edged with hysteria. All the things that would shut us down immediately, all the things that magically appeared overnight. The pieces clicked together in Sophia's mind with the terrible clarity of a puzzle she hadn't wanted to solve. Tuesday night, the Torino family, her unprecedented interaction with Dominic's children, a powerful man asking what time she got off work. This wasn't a coincidence. This was an orchestration. "How long before we can reopen?" Sophia asked, though part of her already knew the answer. 2 weeks minimum, maybe more. The violations were severe enough to trigger a full review of our operating license. Patricia's voice cracked. "Sophia, I can't pay anyone during the closure. I don't have the cash flow. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Sophia nodded, her throat too tight for words. 2 weeks without income. Her rent was due Friday. Her grandmother's prescription refill was scheduled for Thursday, and the pharmacy required payment up front for the specialty medications that kept her diabetes stable. She had $73 in her checking account and $18 in tips from last night's shift, $91 between stability and catastrophe. "I understand," Sophia managed. "It's not your fault." But as she walked back toward the bus stop, her mind was racing. Patricia was right. Those violations hadn't existed yesterday. Sophia had worked in restaurants long enough to know what genuine health code failures looked like, and this wasn't it. This was too convenient, too perfectly timed, too comprehensively destructive. Someone had wanted Lucia Rossetti's closed. Someone had wanted Sophia Chen unemployed and desperate. Someone with the resources to make health inspectors see violations that hadn't been there 12 hours earlier. The bus ride back to Chinatown gave her 47 minutes to think, and by the time she reached her grandmother's apartment, Sophia had made a decision that terrified and steadied her in equal measure. She was going to call Dominic Torino's bluff. Her grandmother's apartment was 2 blocks from Sophia's own, in a building that smelled like medicinal herbs and homemade congee. At 83, Lily Chen was still sharp as a blade and twice as stubborn, but her body was failing her in small, relentless ways that expensive medications could slow but never stop. Sophia found her in the tiny kitchen, standing at the stove with one hand braced against the counter for balance, stirring a pot of soup with determined precision. "Nai, you should be sitting down." Sophia dropped her bag and moved to take the wooden spoon, but her grandmother waved her away with the imperious gesture that had been silencing family arguments for 6 decades. "I am not dead yet, Xiaobao. I can still make soup for my granddaughter." Lily's English was accented but precise, shaped by 70 years of practice and stubborn pride. "Besides, you look like you need feeding." Sophia sank into one of the 2 chairs at the small table, suddenly exhausted. Her grandmother had always been able to read her moods with uncanny accuracy, a skill honed by raising 3 children through poverty and immigration and losing a husband too young. "I lost my job today," Sophia said. Lily's stirring didn't pause, but her shoulders stiffened slightly. "The restaurant?" "Health department shut us down, violations that appeared overnight." Sophia rubbed her temples, feeling the beginning of a headache building behind her eyes. "I think someone arranged it." Lily's non-committal sound could have meant anything, but Sophia knew it meant her grandmother was thinking. "Someone who wants you to need something." "Yes." "Someone who has resources to make health inspectors dance to his tune." "Yes." Lily turned off the burner and moved carefully to the table, settling into the chair across from Sophia with the slow precision of someone whose bones protested every movement. Her dark eyes, still sharp despite her age, studied Sophia's face with the attention of a woman who had survived everything from war to widowhood by reading the truth in people's expressions. "Tell me about this someone." So Sophia did. She told her grandmother about the Torino family, about 3 silent children and their father who wore danger-like expensive cologne. She explained about the children's breakthrough, about Dominic's visit to her apartment, about the conversation that had revealed too much about both of them. Lily listened without interruption, her weathered hands folded on the table, her expression growing more thoughtful with each detail. "He wants to hire you," she said when Sophia finished. "I think so. Yes. To help his children. Yes. And you think he destroyed your current job to force you to accept his offer." Sophia nodded, then caught herself. "I can't prove it, but the timing is too perfect." Lily was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of experience and the kind of wisdom that came from making impossible choices with incomplete information. "In China, during the war, I knew a man who controlled the black market in our district. He could get anything: medicine, food, safe passage out of the city. But everything came with a price, and not always the price you expected to pay." She reached across the table and took Sophia's hands in her own, her skin papery but warm. "This man, this Dominic Torino, he has taken away your choice about whether to need him. That is the action of someone who is used to controlling outcomes. But Xiao Bao, that does not mean his need for you is not genuine." "What are you saying?" "I am saying that desperate people do desperate things, and a father watching his children suffer is the most desperate person in the world." Lily squeezed Sophia's hands gently. "The question is not whether he manipulated the situation. The question is whether you can help those children, and whether the price he will ask is one you can afford to pay." Sophia felt tears burning behind her eyes. Her grandmother always had the ability to cut straight to the heart of any problem, to see past the complications to the essential truth. "I'm scared, Nai. What if I can't help them? What if I make things worse?" "Then you will have tried, and sometimes trying is all we can do." Lily released Sophia's hands and stood slowly, moving back toward the stove. "But Xiao Bao, I do not think you will make things worse. You have always had the gift of seeing what others miss. Even as a child, you could find the hurt places and know how to tend them." The soup was simple, chicken broth with ginger and scallions, the kind of comfort food that tasted like home and safety. They ate in companionable silence, and Sophia felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. Whatever came next, whatever choice she made, her grandmother would understand. The phone rang as Sophia was washing dishes. Her grandmother answered with the formal politeness she reserved for unfamiliar voices, then switched to English with the subtle shift that meant the caller was someone important. "Yes, she is here. One moment, please." Lily held out the phone to Sophia, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Torino." Sophia's heart hammered as she took the phone, her grandmother's knowing look making her feel transparent and foolish. "Mr. Torino." "Sophia." His voice was warm honey over broken glass, familiar despite their single conversation. "I hope I'm not intruding. I got your grandmother's number from the restaurant's emergency contact list." Of course he had. The same way he'd arranged for health inspectors to find violations that hadn't existed. The same way he'd probably known exactly what her financial situation looked like before he'd ever walked into her apartment. "What can I do for you?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady. "I have a proposition, a job offer. I was hoping we could discuss it in person." "I'm listening." "Not over the phone. Are you familiar with Washington Square Park? There's a playground there. My children will be there in an hour with their nanny. Perhaps you could join us." It wasn't really a request, Sophia realised. It was a carefully phrased command dressed up as an invitation. But underneath the control she could hear something else. Hope, maybe, or desperation disguised as confidence. "I'll be there," she said. "Good. And Sophia, bring a sketchbook. I think the children would like that." The line went dead, and Sophia stared at the phone in her hand, feeling like she'd just agreed to step off a cliff without knowing how far the fall would be. Her grandmother was watching her with the expression of someone who had already guessed the outcome of the conversation. "You are going to work for him," Lily said. It wasn't a question. "I don't have a choice." "There is always a choice, Xiao Bao, but sometimes all the choices are dangerous ones, and we must pick the danger that serves something larger than our own safety." Sophia kissed her grandmother's forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of tiger balm and jasmine tea that had meant comfort and home for as long as she could remember. "If this goes badly—" "It will not go badly," Lily interrupted firmly. "You are stronger than you know, and those children need what you can give them. Trust yourself, Xiao Bao, and trust that some risks are worth taking." An hour later, Sophia stood at the edge of Washington Square Park with a sketchbook tucked under her arm, watching 3 small figures on the playground equipment while a man in an expensive coat observed from a nearby bench. The children spotted her before their father did. Marco waved from the top of the slide, his face lighting up with recognition. Isabella called out something in what sounded like Italian, her voice bright and unguarded. Elena abandoned the swing set and ran towards Sophia with the fearless enthusiasm of a child who had decided that some adults were safe. And Sophia realised that Lily had been right. Some risks were absolutely worth taking, even if she was about to find out exactly how much Dominic Torino intended to make her pay for the privilege of saving his children's voices. The conversation that would change her life was waiting on a park bench in the autumn sunshine, and Sophia Chen walked toward it with steady hands and an open heart. Behind her, the memory of her grandmother's voice followed like a blessing. "Trust yourself, Xiaobao, you are stronger than you know." The mashed potatoes were Sophia's first revelation. Not the expensive organic ones that the Torino Estate's chef prepared with truffle oil and imported butter, but the simple box mix that Sophia had requested from the kitchen staff, with the kind of polite firmness that suggested this was not negotiable. "Food is communication," she explained to Dominic, who was watching from the dining room doorway as she worked with his children at the massive mahogany table. Before we had written language, before we had spoken words, humans shared meaning through preparing and sharing meals. It's the oldest form of artistic expression. Marco, Isabella and Eleanor sat around her like satellites around the sun, their faces intent and serious as Sophia demonstrated how to write letters in the pale mound on each child's plate. The potatoes were the perfect medium, soft enough to shape, substantial enough to hold form, forgiving enough to erase and start over. "Watch," Sophia said, using her index finger to trace a careful M in Marco's serving. "This is the first letter of your name. The shape of it belongs to you." Marco's dark eyes went wide. He reached out tentatively, then, with growing confidence, traced the letter with his own small finger. When he looked up at Sophia, his smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "More," he whispered, the word barely audible but perfectly clear. Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady and calm. "Of course. What letter would you like to try next?" "A?" The voice came from Isabella, who had been watching her brother with fascination. For apple." And then Elena, not to be outdone by her siblings. "E, like my name." Within 20 minutes, the dining table looked like a battlefield of creative destruction. 3 plates of mashed potatoes had been transformed into practice canvases, covered with letters and simple words and small drawings that made sense only to their young artists. The children's faces were smeared with potato, their fingers sticky with their medium, their voices growing stronger with each successful communication. Dominic hadn't moved from the doorway, but Sophia could feel the weight of his attention like heat from a fire. When she finally glanced in his direction, she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Wonder, yes, but also a kind of desperate hunger, as if he were witnessing a miracle he'd stopped believing was possible. "Papa!" Marco's voice rang out clear and strong, the first time he'd addressed his father directly since that terrible Tuesday 3 years ago. "Look, I wrote hungry." The word was spelled out in uneven letters across Marco's plate, each character formed with painstaking care. But more than the achievement of literacy, it represented something far more precious, a child asking for what he needed instead of suffering in silence. Dominic's face went through a series of transformations: surprise, joy, relief, and something that might have been tears if not for the iron control he maintained over his emotions. He moved to the table slowly, as if approaching a wild animal that might spook. "That's excellent penmanship," he said, his voice carefully modulated. "Chef Giuseppe will be very interested to know what you're hungry for." Marco beamed and immediately began writing pancakes in his mashed potatoes. Isabella, inspired by her brother's success, started forming Chinese characters that Sophia had taught her the day before, simple pictographs that represented concepts like home and family and safe. Elena, the youngest and most daring, was experimenting with drawing tiny faces in her potatoes, each one wearing a different expression. "This is remarkable," Dominic said quietly, stepping closer to Sophia. "In 3 days you've accomplished what 2 years of specialists couldn't." "I haven't accomplished anything," Sophia replied, watching as Isabella carefully wrote Mama Sophia in both English and Chinese characters. "They accomplished it themselves. I just gave them permission to try." The correction was important, Sophia knew. The children needed to own their progress, to understand that their healing was coming from their own courage rather than from adult intervention. But she could see that Dominic was struggling with the distinction, his businessman's mind wanting to quantify and replicate what was happening at his dining room table. "The technique," he pressed. "Could you teach it to others?" Sophia turned to face him fully, noting the intensity in his dark eyes. "This isn't a technique, Mr. Torino. It's relationship. It's trust. It's the kind of safety that takes time to build and can be destroyed in an instant by pushing too hard or celebrating too loudly." As if to illustrate her point, Elena looked up from her potato artwork and spoke in the clear, carrying voice of a child who had remembered she had important things to say. "Sophia, are you going to stay with us forever?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sophia could feel Dominic's attention sharpening, could sense the weight of expectation and hope and fear that surrounded this moment. The children were all looking at her now, their sticky fingers forgotten, their breathing slightly accelerated with the anxiety that came from asking questions that might have disappointing answers. "I'm going to stay as long as you need me," Sophia said carefully, "and as long as your father wants me to stay." "He wants you to stay," Isabella said, with the matter-of-fact certainty of a child who had been observing adult behaviour with sharp eyes. "He watches you like Nonna used to watch us when we were learning to walk, like he's scared we might fall but proud when we don't." Out of the mouths of babes, Sophia thought, children saw things that adults spent enormous energy trying to hide or deny. "Your Nonna sounds like she was very wise," Sophia said. "She was Mama's mama," Marco explained, his voice growing stronger with use. "She lived with us before the bad day. She used to say that families aren't just the people you're born to. They're the people who choose to love you even when you're being difficult." The simplicity of the statement hit Sophia like a physical blow. She glanced at Dominic and saw her own emotion reflected in his face, the recognition that these children were processing their trauma with a wisdom that shamed most adults. "Your Nonna was absolutely right," Sophia said. "Does that mean you're choosing to love us even when we're being difficult?" Elena asked, her voice small but hopeful. Sophia looked at this child, 6 years old, brave enough to break 3 years of silence, covered in mashed potatoes and wearing her heart on her sleeve, and felt something fundamental shift in her chest. "Yes," she said simply, "I am choosing to love you even when you're being difficult. All of you." The silence that followed was different from the traumatic silence that had defined the Torino household for 3 years. This was the silence of absorption, of children processing a promise that would reshape their understanding of safety and belonging. Then Marco did something extraordinary. He reached across the table and took Sophia's hand with his sticky fingers, looked her directly in the eyes, and said in a voice that was clear and strong and completely unafraid, "We choose to love you too, Sophia, even when you make us eat vegetables." The laughter that erupted from all 3 children was like music after years of quiet. Bright, unguarded, joyful noise that filled the cavernous dining room and seemed to chase shadows from corners that had been dark too long. Sophia laughed too and realised she was crying at the same time, tears of relief and happiness and something deeper that felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. When she looked at Dominic, she found him watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. There was gratitude there, yes, but also something more complicated, something that looked like recognition, as if he were seeing her clearly for the first time. "Thank you," he said quietly, the words meant for her alone, despite the children's chatter surrounding them. "Thank you for letting me try," Sophia replied. The moment stretched between them, loaded with unspoken understanding and the kind of tension that had nothing to do with the children, and everything to do with the way Dominic's eyes seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed defences. Then Elena tugged on Sophia's sleeve, and the spell broke. "Sophia, can you teach us how to make words with ketchup too? I want to write my name in red letters." "Red letters it is," Sophia said, grateful for the distraction. "But first, let's clean up our potato masterpieces and wash our hands. Artists always clean their workspace when they're finished." As the children ran toward the kitchen to wash up, chattering excitedly about their next artistic experiment, Dominic moved closer to Sophia, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her suddenly aware of her own appearance. She was covered in mashed potatoes, her hair was escaping its ponytail, and she probably looked like she'd been wrestling with kindergartners, which she supposed she had been. "Sophia," Dominic said, and her name in his mouth sounded different than it had before, warmer, more personal. "Would you have dinner with me tonight, after the children are asleep?" The invitation was simple, but Sophia could hear layers of meaning underneath it. This wasn't just about discussing her employment or the children's progress. This was about the electric tension that had been building between them since that first night when he'd appeared at her apartment like a dangerous answer to prayers she hadn't known she was praying. Sophia started, then stopped. Professional boundaries. She was the children's caretaker, their therapeutic companion. Getting personally involved with their father was exactly the kind of complication that could undermine everything they'd built together. But when she looked at Dominic's face, she saw more than just attraction or opportunity. She saw a man who had been carrying the weight of his children's pain for 3 years, who was finally allowing himself to hope again, who was looking at her like she might be the answer to more than just his children's healing. "Yes," she heard herself say, "I'd like that." His smile was slow and devastating, transforming his austere features into something that made Sophia understand why powerful men were dangerous in more ways than just the obvious ones. 8 o'clock, he said. "I'll have Giuseppe prepare something special." As he walked away to check on the children, Sophia remained standing in the dining room, staring at the chaos of mashed potatoes and the evidence of breakthrough that covered the mahogany table. She had come to this house to heal 3 traumatized children. She was beginning to suspect she might end up healing herself in the process. And if the way Dominic Torino looked at her was any indication, the kind of healing they were all heading toward was going to be far more complicated and far more dangerous than anything she had prepared herself for. Outside, the San Francisco fog was beginning to roll in from the bay, but inside the Torino estate, something warm and bright and hopeful was taking root. Sophia just hoped she was strong enough to nurture it without getting burned in the process. The sound began at 6:47 in the morning, floating through the estate's hallways like a ghost finding its voice. Isabella was humming. Sophia froze in the kitchen doorway, her hand still gripping the ceramic mug that held her first cup of coffee. Her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat. The melody was simple, almost hesitant, a lullaby that sounded like childhood and memory, and the kind of music that lived in the spaces between words. For 3 days now, Sophia had been documenting every breakthrough in the leather-bound journal that Dominic had given her. Marco's first written word. Elena's shy request for more paper, please. The way all 3 children had begun incorporating Mandarin phrases into their English sentences, creating a hybrid language that belonged only to them. But this was different. This wasn't communication or request or even conscious expression. This was pure, unconscious joy emerging from a child who had forgotten she had a voice. Isabella sat at the breakfast table with her sketch pad, drawing what looked like a garden full of flowers that defied botanical reality. Purple roses with silver leaves, blue daisies with golden centres, trees that grew butterflies instead of fruit. And as she drew, she hummed a melody that her mother had probably sung to her in some distant, safer time. Sophia set down her coffee mug and moved carefully to the table, her footsteps silent on the marble floor. She didn't want to startle Isabella out of this moment, didn't want to make the little girl conscious of what she was doing and risk breaking the spell. "That's a beautiful song," Sophia said softly, sliding into the chair beside Isabella. The humming stopped abruptly. Isabella's hand froze over her sketch pad, her dark eyes wide with something that looked like fear. "It's okay," Sophia said quickly. "You don't have to stop. I was enjoying listening to you." "Mama used to sing it," Isabella whispered, her voice so quiet Sophia had to lean forward to hear her, "when we had bad dreams." Sophia's heart clenched. This was the first time any of the children had mentioned their mother directly, the first crack in the careful wall they'd built around their grief. "It sounds like she had a lovely voice," Sophia said, "just like you do." Isabella's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I can't remember all the words, just the tune." Music is like that sometimes. The feeling stays even when the words get lost. Sophia picked up one of Isabella's coloured pencils and began adding small details to the drawing. Dewdrops on the impossible flowers, tiny birds perched on butterfly trees. But sometimes, if we're patient, the words come back too. They worked in comfortable silence for several minutes, Isabella's confidence returning as she watched Sophia contribute to her artwork. Gradually, almost unconsciously, the humming began again, softer this time, more tentative but undeniably present. Sophia was so absorbed in this fragile moment of progress that she didn't notice they had an audience until a shadow fell across the table. Vincent Calabresi stood in the kitchen doorway, his expensive suit immaculate despite the early hour, his pale eyes calculating as they moved between Sophia and Isabella. Dominic's consigliere had been civil but distant since Sophia's arrival at the estate, watching her with the kind of professional suspicion that came from a lifetime of identifying threats before they materialized. "Good morning, Miss Chen," Vincent said, his voice carrying the smooth politeness that barely concealed distrust. "I was looking for the boss. He's not in his office." "He's in the gym," Sophia replied, not looking up from Isabella's drawing. "He said something about a conference call with the East Coast." Isabella's humming had stopped the moment Vincent appeared, her small body tensing with the kind of animal awareness that children developed when they lived in worlds where adult moods could shift without warning. "Of course." Vincent's smile was perfectly calibrated, warm enough to seem friendly, cool enough to maintain distance. "Isabella, that's very pretty artwork. Your mother would be proud." The comment was meant to be kind, Sophia realized, but she could see how it landed with Isabella. The little girl's face crumpled slightly, her grip tightening on her pencil until her knuckles went white. "She is proud," Sophia said firmly, meeting Vincent's gaze with steady eyes. "Love doesn't disappear just because someone dies. It changes form, but it doesn't end." Something flickered in Vincent's expression. Surprise, maybe, or assessment. He studied Sophia with renewed attention, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "That's a very optimistic perspective," he said. "It's a realistic one," Sophia replied. "Children need to know that the people who love them continue loving them even from a distance. It's the foundation of healing." Vincent nodded slowly, but Sophia caught the subtle tightness around his eyes. He was filing away this conversation, cataloguing her responses for some future purpose. The realization sent a small chill down her spine. "Well," he said finally, "I should find the boss. Important business to discuss." After he left, Isabella remained tense and quiet, her humming replaced by the kind of focused silence that spoke of a child trying very hard to disappear. Sophia waited, understanding that the moment needed space to breathe before it could be repaired. "Vincent seems worried about something," Isabella said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Sophia looked at her sharply. Children saw things that adults missed, especially children who had learned to read danger in the subtle shifts of body language and tone. "What makes you say that?" He keeps looking at his phone. And yesterday, when he thought we weren't listening, he told Papa that you were making us soft." Isabella's dark eyes were serious, older than her 8 years. "What does that mean, Sophia? Making us soft?" Sophia felt something cold settle in her stomach. Vincent's concerns about her influence weren't just professional suspicion. They were strategic calculations about vulnerability and strength. In his world, children who spoke freely were children who could be hurt more easily. Sometimes adults worry that if children feel too safe, they won't be careful enough to protect themselves, Sophia said carefully. But I think being able to trust the right people makes children stronger, not weaker. Isabella nodded thoughtfully, then returned to her drawing with renewed focus. But Sophia noticed that the humming didn't start again, and the flowers in Isabella's garden suddenly looked more like shields than blooms. The day progressed with its usual rhythm of small breakthroughs and careful nurturing. Marco wrote a complete sentence asking for chocolate chip pancakes with extra syrup, please. Elena discovered she could make her name in both English and Chinese characters, practicing until her fingers were stained with marker ink. All 3 children participated in a spirited discussion about which animals would make the best pets, their voices overlapping with the kind of chaotic enthusiasm that had been absent from the house for 3 years. But underneath the progress, Sophia could feel something shifting, a tension in the air that reminded her of the pressure before thunderstorms. The business meeting that afternoon confirmed her suspicions. Sophia was helping the children with their art projects in the sunroom when she heard voices from Dominic's office. Raised voices, speaking in rapid Italian with the kind of urgency that transcended language barriers. She couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Argument, disagreement, conflict. The children heard it too. Marco's hand stilled over his watercolour painting. Elena looked toward the office with wide, frightened eyes. Isabella set down her coloured pencils and moved closer to Sophia's chair. "It's okay," Sophia said softly. "Sometimes adults need to discuss difficult things. It doesn't mean anyone is in danger." But even as she said the words, Sophia wasn't sure they were true. The argument in Dominic's office had the quality of men disagreeing about something that could get people killed. When Dominic finally emerged an hour later, his face was a mask of controlled fury. Vincent followed behind him, along with 2 other men Sophia didn't recognise, older, harder, with the kind of scars that spoke of violence survived rather than avoided. "Sophia," Dominic said, his voice carefully modulated despite the tension radiating from his shoulders, "could you take the children upstairs for their quiet time?" It wasn't a request. Sophia gathered the children smoothly, herding them toward the stairs with the kind of calm efficiency that came from years of managing crisis situations in restaurant kitchens. But as they climbed to the 2nd floor, she could hear the conversation resuming below. Voices low and urgent, speaking about territories and shipments and someone named Moretti who was pushing boundaries. Isabella tugged on Sophia's sleeve as they reached the landing. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. Sophia knelt down so they were eye level, gathering all 3 children close to her. "No, sweetheart, you're not in trouble. Your father is just handling some business matters that don't concern you." "But they concern you," Marco said, with the sharp intuition of a child who had learned to read adult fear. "Vincent doesn't like you. He thinks you make us weak." The directness of the observation caught Sophia off guard. She looked at Marco, this brave little boy who was finally using his voice to express complex thoughts, and realised she owed him honesty rather than empty reassurance. "Vincent is worried about keeping your family safe," she said carefully. "Sometimes people disagree about the best way to do that." "Do you make us weak?" Elena asked, her small face serious. Sophia considered the question, aware that her answer would shape how these children understood strength and vulnerability for years to come. "I think loving people and letting them love you back makes you stronger, not weaker," she said finally. "But some people believe that caring about others makes you easier to hurt. That's what Vincent is worried about." Papa cares about us, Isabella said firmly. That doesn't make him weak. No, Sophia agreed. It makes him brave. The bravest people are the ones who love others even when it's dangerous. The children absorbed this with the gravity of small philosophers. Then Eleanor did something that made Sophia's breath catch. She stepped closer to Sophia and wrapped her arms around her waist, pressing her face against Sophia's shoulder. "We love you, Sophia," she said clearly, "even if it makes us weak." Marco and Isabella joined the embrace without hesitation, their small bodies warm and solid against Sophia's sides. For a moment, Sophia allowed herself to feel the full weight of what they were offering: trust, affection, the kind of uncomplicated devotion that could break hearts or heal them. "I love you too," she whispered into their hair, "all of you, and that doesn't make any of us weak. It makes us family." Later that evening, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, Sophia found Dominic in his office. He was sitting behind his massive desk, staring at papers that looked like architectural blueprints, his expression distant and troubled. "The children spoke a lot today," Sophia said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Isabella hummed for the first time. Marco wrote complete sentences. Elena figured out how to make her name in 2 languages. Dominic looked up, and Sophia could see exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. "That's remarkable progress." "Vincent doesn't think so." The words hung between them like a challenge. Dominic's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny the implication. "Vincent is concerned about operational security," he said carefully. "Children who talk freely are children who might say the wrong things to the wrong people. And children who never talk are children who can't call for help when they need it," Sophia countered. "Which kind of vulnerability is worse?" Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the polished wood of his desktop. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of decisions that had no good options. "There's a situation developing, a territorial dispute with a family called the Morettis. Vincent thinks your presence here, the progress the children are making, makes us a more visible target." Sophia felt her pulse quicken. More visible how? Happy children are noticed. Children who laugh and play and interact with new people draw attention. Before you came, my family was essentially invisible. We existed in silence, which made us harder to track and target. The logic was brutal but sound. Sophia could see how her success with the children might create new vulnerabilities, how their healing could paradoxically put them in more danger. "What are you saying?" she asked. Dominic looked at her with an expression that broke her heart, love and desperation, and the terrible weight of choosing between different kinds of protection. "I'm saying that Vincent may be right, and if he is, then keeping you here might be the most selfish thing I've ever done." Sophia stared at him, feeling something fundamental shift in her understanding of the situation. She had come here to heal 3 traumatized children. She was learning that some forms of healing carried prices that might be too high to pay. Outside Dominic's office windows, San Francisco glittered like scattered diamonds, beautiful and distant and utterly indifferent to the impossible choices being made in a house where love and danger existed in perfect, terrifying balance. The question that would determine everyone's future hung unspoken in the air. Was the sound of children's voices worth the risk of those voices being silenced forever? The storm came at midnight, and with it 3 small bodies seeking refuge in Sophia's bed. Thunder cracked across San Francisco Bay like gunshots, and Sophia woke to find Elena tugging at her blankets, her small face pale in the lightning-illuminated darkness. Behind her, Marco and Isabella hovered in the doorway of Sophia's guest room, their eyes wide with the kind of fear that went deeper than weather. "Scary," Elena whispered, the word barely audible over the rain lashing against the windows. "Stay," Marco added, his voice trembling but determined. "Together," Isabella finished, climbing onto the bed without waiting for permission. Sophia's heart clenched as she realised what she was witnessing. For the first time in 3 years, the Torino children were not just speaking. They were asking for comfort. They were admitting to fear and seeking protection from someone they trusted to provide it. "Of course you can stay," Sophia said, pulling back the covers to make room. "All of you." They arranged themselves around her like small planets orbiting a sun, their warm bodies pressed against her sides, their breathing gradually slowing as the security of physical closeness worked its ancient magic. But Sophia could feel the tension in their muscles, the way they startled at each thunderclap, and she understood that this wasn't just about the storm. "It sounds like guns," Marco whispered into the darkness. The admission hung in the air like a revelation. Sophia felt her throat tighten as she realized these children had been living with the sound of their mother's murder for 3 years, and every loud noise, every unexpected crack of sound took them back to that terrible Tuesday in the park. "I know," Sophia said softly. "Thunder can sound like lots of scary things, but you're safe here. The storm is outside, and you're inside with me." "Are you scared of storms?" Eleanor asked. Sophia considered lying, offering the kind of false bravery that adults usually presented to children. Instead, she chose honesty. "Sometimes, when I was little and living in foster homes, storms used to make me feel very alone. I would hide under blankets and count the seconds between lightning and thunder to see how far away the danger was." "Will you teach us?" Isabella asked. So Sophia did. She taught them to count 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, to measure the distance of lightning strikes. She explained how thunder was just the sound of air being heated so quickly it expanded like a balloon, nothing more dangerous than nature's way of making noise. She told them about her grandmother's belief that storms were just the sky cleaning itself, washing away old sadness to make room for new happiness. As the storm gradually moved away and the children's breathing settled into the deep rhythm of sleep, Sophia lay awake thinking about transformation. 3 months ago, these children had been locked in silence, unreachable in their trauma. Tonight, they had run to her room not to hide from their fear, but to share it. They had used words to name their terror and asked for what they needed. They were healing, and that healing was about to put them all in terrible danger. The next morning brought the kind of crystalline sunshine that only followed San Francisco storms, and with it the children's voices bright and unguarded as spring water. "Sophia, can we make pancakes shaped like animals?" Marco asked at breakfast, his words tumbling over each other with enthusiasm. "Can we put faces on them with berries?" Isabella added. "Can we make a whole zoo?" Elena chimed in, clapping her hands together. Their chatter filled the enormous kitchen like music, and Sophia found herself laughing at their excitement, caught up in the joy of children who had remembered how to want things and ask for them without fear. She was so absorbed in flipping elephant-shaped pancakes and helping Elena arrange blueberries into smiley faces that she almost missed the moment when everything changed. Dominic appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face drawn and serious despite his children's bright greeting of, "Papa! Papa, look what we made." Behind him stood Vincent Calabresi and 2 men Sophia didn't recognise, older, harder, with the kind of watchful stillness that spoke of violence held carefully in check. "Good morning," Dominic said, his voice carrying a forced lightness that didn't reach his eyes. "I see the storm didn't keep anyone from sleeping well." "We slept in Sophia's bed," Eleanor announced proudly. "She taught us how to count thunder." Sophia felt the temperature in the kitchen drop 10 degrees. The men behind Vincent exchanged glances, and she could practically hear their thoughts. The children were getting too attached, too comfortable, too willing to share information with outsiders. "That was very kind of Sophia," Dominic said carefully, "but perhaps we should let her have some space tonight. Big beds are for big people." Elena's face crumpled. "But we like sleeping with Sophia. She makes the scary sounds go away." "There are no scary sounds in this house," Vincent said, his voice carrying an edge of impatience. "This house is perfectly safe. Children who are properly protected don't need to be afraid of storms." The criticism was subtle but unmistakable. Vincent was suggesting that Sophia was encouraging weakness, that she was teaching the children to seek comfort instead of developing the kind of self-reliance that would serve them in Dominic's world. Sophia felt her temper flare, but before she could respond, Marco did something that made her blood run cold. He looked directly at Vincent and spoke with the clear, carrying voice of a child who had forgotten that some truths were dangerous to tell. "But Sophia isn't scary like you are. When you're here, Papa's hands shake. When Sophia's here, Papa smiles." The silence that followed was suffocating. Vincent's face went very still, and Sophia could see him filing away this observation for future use. The fact that Dominic's emotional state was visible to his children, that his feelings about Sophia were apparent enough for a 6-year-old to notice, this was exactly the kind of vulnerability that Vincent had been warning against. "Children see things that aren't always true," Vincent said smoothly. "Sometimes they imagine connections that don't exist." "I'm not imagining," Marco replied, with the stubborn honesty of childhood. "I draw pictures of Papa's face. I know when he's happy and when he's worried. Sophia makes him happy. You make him worried." Isabella and Elena nodded in agreement, their small faces serious and supportive of their brother's courage. Sophia felt something crack open in her chest, pride and terror in equal measure. These children were finding their voices, standing up for themselves and the people they loved. But they were also revealing family dynamics to men who might use that information as a weapon. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation in my office," Dominic said, his voice tight with the kind of control that suggested barely contained emotion. As the men filed out of the kitchen, Vincent paused at Sophia's shoulder. "Children who talk too freely sometimes say things they shouldn't," he said quietly. His words meant for her alone. It might be wise to remember that. After they left, the children continued eating their pancakes, but their chatter had dimmed. They could feel the shift in atmosphere, the way their innocent observations had somehow created tension they didn't understand. "Did we say something wrong?" Isabella asked, her voice small. Sophia knelt beside her chair, meeting the little girl's worried eyes. "You didn't say anything wrong. You told the truth, which is always the right thing to do. Sometimes adults have complicated feelings about the truth, but that's not your responsibility." "Are you going to leave?" Elena asked, and the fear in her voice was so raw that Sophia felt tears prick at her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere," Sophia said firmly. "Not unless you want me to." But even as she made the promise, Sophia could hear the raised voices coming from Dominic's office. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Argument, disagreement, the kind of heated discussion that preceded difficult decisions. The conversation that would determine her fate was happening without her, and there was nothing she could do but wait and help 3 brave children finish their zoo-shaped breakfast while their world potentially crumbled around them. An hour later, Dominic found Sophia in the garden, where she was helping the children plant herbs in small terracotta pots. His face was carefully neutral, but she could see the storm still raging behind his dark eyes. "Sophia, could I speak with you privately?" The children looked up from their planting, dirt under their fingernails, concern written across their small faces. They had developed an almost supernatural ability to read adult tension, a survival skill learned in the aftermath of trauma. "It's all right," Sophia told them gently. "Keep working on your herb garden. I'll be right back." She followed Dominic to a secluded corner of the property where ancient olive trees provided privacy from both the house and the children. The morning sun was warm on her shoulders, but Sophia felt cold spreading through her chest. "Vincent wants you gone," Dominic said without preamble. "He believes the progress the children are making creates unacceptable security risks." Sophia had been expecting this, but hearing it still felt like a physical blow. "And what do you believe?" Dominic ran his hands through his dark hair, looking older than his 35 years. "I believe my children spoke their first words in 3 years because of you. I believe they slept through a storm last night instead of having nightmares about gunshots. I believe you've given them back something I thought they'd lost forever. But but I also believe that Vincent may be right about the danger." Dominic's voice was rough with conflicting loyalties. "The Moretti family has been watching us, looking for weaknesses, children who talk freely, who form attachments to new people, who display happiness that makes them memorable. These things make them targets." Sophia stared at him, understanding the impossible position he was in. As a father, he wanted his children healed. As the head of a criminal organization, he needed them invisible and safe. "So you're choosing safety over healing," she said. "I'm choosing their lives over everything else." The words came out like a confession torn from his throat. "Even if it means watching them retreat back into silence, even if it means losing the best thing that's happened to this family in 3 years. Sophia felt her heart break for him, for the terrible choice he was being forced to make, for the way love and danger were so perfectly intertwined in his world that they couldn't be separated. "There's something you should know," she said quietly. "This morning, when the children came to my room during the storm, they didn't just speak. They chose to trust me with their fear. They decided that feeling safe was worth the risk of being vulnerable. That's not weakness, Dominic. That's courage. Courage that could get them killed. Silence that will definitely kill who they're meant to become." They stood in the olive grove staring at each other, 2 people who loved 3 children enough to want different things for them, 2 people caught between competing definitions of protection. "I have to think about this," Dominic said finally. "Vincent is giving me 24 hours to make a decision." Sophia nodded, understanding that there was nothing more to say. The choice was his to make, and she would have to live with whatever he decided. As they walked back toward the house, she could hear the children's voices calling to them from the garden, bright and unguarded, and completely unaware that their newly found words might be about to cost them the person who had taught them how to use them. "Sophia, Papa, come see our herb garden. We planted basil and rosemary and something called oregano." The sound of their excitement was like sunshine after rain, like hope made audible. And Sophia wondered if Dominic could hear it too, the sound of children who had learned to believe that their voices mattered, who had discovered that love was worth the risk of speaking it out loud. 24 hours to decide whether that sound was worth preserving or too dangerous to allow. 24 hours to choose between healing and safety, between love and survival, between the people his children were becoming and the people they might need to remain. Sophia looked at Dominic's profile as they approached the garden and saw a man carrying the weight of a decision that had no right answer. In 24 hours, one way or another, everything would change. 23 hours and 17 minutes after Vincent's ultimatum, Sophia made a discovery that changed everything. She found the bug while helping Elena organise her art supplies in the playroom. It was wedged behind the wooden toy chest, a device no bigger than a button battery, its black surface barely visible against the dark mahogany. Sophia might have missed it entirely if Eleanor hadn't dropped her box of crayons and crawled under the furniture to retrieve the scattered pieces. "Sophia, what's this?" Eleanor asked, emerging from beneath the toy chest with the small device balanced on her palm. Sophia's blood turned to ice water. She recognised the device from her years watching crime dramas with her grandmother. A listening device, professionally installed, capable of transmitting conversations to receivers miles away. Someone had been listening to every word spoken in the children's playroom. Every breakthrough, every vulnerable moment, every plan Sophia had discussed with the children about their healing journey. "It's nothing important, sweetheart," Sophia said, keeping her voice carefully neutral as she took the device from Elena's small hand. "Just something that fell from one of the toys. Why don't you go wash your hands for lunch while I finish cleaning up here?" As soon as Elena left the room, Sophia began searching systematically. What she found made her stomach clench with betrayal and terror. 4 more devices hidden throughout the children's living spaces, behind picture frames, under furniture, inside light fixtures. Someone had been conducting surveillance on 3 traumatized children in their most private moments. But the real revelation came when Sophia found the 6th device. It was hidden in her own bedroom, tucked behind the bedside lamp where it would capture every conversation, every phone call, every private moment she'd experienced since arriving at the estate. Someone had been listening when the children came to her room during the storm. Someone had heard Marco say, "It sounds like guns." Someone had recorded Isabella humming her mother's lullaby for the first time in 3 years. And that someone had been using the children's progress as evidence that Sophia was making them vulnerable. Sophia stared at the collection of devices spread across her bedside table, her mind racing through the implications. This wasn't random surveillance. This was systematic intelligence gathering by someone with intimate access to the estate, someone who knew exactly where to place listening devices for maximum coverage. Someone inside the family was feeding information to outsiders. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made Sophia quickly sweep the devices into her pocket. She was arranging her face into a calm expression when Isabella appeared in the doorway. "Sophia, Papa wants to see you in his office. He looks—" Isabella paused, her 8-year-old vocabulary searching for words to describe complex adult emotions. "He looks like he does before he has to make hard decisions." Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs. Vincent's deadline. Dominic had reached his decision about whether she could stay. "Thank you for the message, sweetheart," Sophia said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I'll be right there." But as she walked toward Dominic's office, Sophia knew the conversation was about to become far more complicated than a simple employment decision. The devices in her pocket felt like grenades waiting to explode, evidence that would shatter Vincent's position but potentially destroy the family in the process. She found Dominic standing behind his desk, his face a mask of controlled anguish. Vincent sat in one of the leather chairs, his expression smugly satisfied in a way that made Sophia want to check his pockets for missing surveillance equipment. "Sophia," Dominic said, his voice rough with exhaustion, "please sit down." Sophia remained standing, her hand closing around the listening devices in her pocket. "Before you say anything, there's something you need to know." "The decision has been made," Vincent interjected smoothly. "We appreciate your service to the family, but your employment here is no longer viable. Security concerns take precedence over therapeutic progress." "Vincent," Sophia said, looking directly at him, "how long have you been feeding information to the Morettis?" The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Vincent's face went very still, but Sophia caught the micro-expression that flashed across his features: surprise, calculation, and something that looked like panic before his professional mask slammed back into place. "That's a very serious accusation," he said carefully. Sophia pulled the listening devices from her pocket and set them on Dominic's desk like evidence in a courtroom. 6 small black objects that contained enough recorded conversations to destroy lives. "I found these hidden throughout the children's rooms and my bedroom," she said. Professional-grade surveillance equipment placed by someone with intimate knowledge of the estate's layout and the family's routines. Dominic stared at the devices, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and something that looked like heartbreak. Vincent leaned forward, examining the equipment with what appeared to be professional curiosity. "These could have been planted by anyone," Vincent said. "Cleaning staff, maintenance workers, even you, Miss Chen, to deflect attention from your own activities." "You're right," Sophia agreed. "They could have been planted by anyone with access, but there's something interesting about their placement." She picked up one of the devices and turned it over in her fingers. This one was behind Elena's art easel, positioned to capture conversations during her drawing sessions. This one was in Marco's reading nook, perfect for recording his verbal exercises. And this one, she held up the device from her own room, was placed to monitor my private conversations and phone calls. Sophia looked directly at Vincent. Whoever placed these knew exactly when and where the most sensitive conversations would take place. They knew the children's therapy schedule, their preferred play areas, their bedtime routines. That kind of detailed intelligence requires someone with daily access to family operations. "What are you suggesting?" Dominic asked, though his voice suggested he was beginning to understand. I'm suggesting that Vincent has been documenting the children's progress, not to protect them, but to prove they were becoming a liability, Sophia said. Every breakthrough, every moment of joy, every sign that they were healing. It was all being recorded and transmitted to people who wanted to use their recovery as evidence that this family was losing its edge. Vincent's laugh was smooth and dismissive. This is paranoid speculation from someone desperate to keep her position. I've served this family loyally for 15 years. My commitment to Dominic and his children is unquestionable. Then you won't mind if we examine your phone, Sophia said. The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Vincent's eyes flickered, just for a moment, just long enough for Sophia to catch the flash of calculation that proved her suspicions correct. My phone contains sensitive business communications, Vincent said. It's not appropriate to... Vincent, Dominic's voice cut through the protest like a blade. Give me your phone. The silence that followed was suffocating. Sophia could see Vincent weighing his options, calculating whether cooperation or resistance would better serve his position. Finally, with the slow reluctance of a man buying time, he reached into his jacket and produced his phone. Dominic took it without ceremony and began scrolling through recent calls and messages. What he found there made his face go white with fury. Text messages to a number registered to Michael Moretti, Dominic said, his voice deadly quiet. Photos of the children, audio files labelled with dates and times, financial records showing payments of $50,000 transferred monthly for the past 6 months. Vincent's carefully constructed facade finally cracked. Dom, you have to understand. They threatened my daughter, my grandson. The Morettis know where they live, where she works. I had to give them something. So you gave them my children, Dominic said. I gave them intelligence that proved the family was still strong. Vincent's voice rose with desperate justification. I thought if I could document that the children were becoming vulnerable, you'd see reason and send the woman away. Then the surveillance would end and everyone would be safe. Sophia felt sick. You used their healing as a weapon against them. I used their healing to protect them, Vincent snapped. Do you have any idea what the Morettis would do if they thought this family was weak? If they believed Dominic's children could be easily targeted? I was trying to prove that the old ways were better, that silence was safer. By violating their privacy and recording their most vulnerable moments, Sophia said. By preventing a war that would get all of them killed. Dominic moved around the desk with predatory grace, and Sophia could see the violence coiled in his muscles, the careful control that barely contained his rage. 15 years, Dominic said softly. 15 years of trust, of shared meals, of you holding my children as babies, and you sold them out for your own family's safety. I never meant for it to go this far, Vincent said, backing toward the door. The surveillance was supposed to be temporary, just until you came to your senses about the woman. The woman, Dominic repeated, who just saved my children from a betrayal they never saw coming. The woman who protected them while you were documenting their progress for my enemies. Sophia saw Vincent's hand move toward his jacket and reacted on instinct, stepping between him and Dominic. Don't, she said firmly. The children are upstairs. They don't need to hear gunshots in their own home. Vincent's hand stilled, but his eyes were wild with the desperation of a cornered animal. This doesn't end with me, he said. The Morettis have been planning something for months. They know about the woman, about the children's recovery, about everything. Removing me won't stop what's already in motion. What's in motion? Dominic demanded. Vincent's smile was bitter and defeated. Ask Sophia. She's the one they really want. Before either Sophia or Dominic could react, Vincent pulled a small device from his pocket. Not a weapon, but a transmitter. He pressed a button and spoke into it with the calm precision of a man who had nothing left to lose. Phoenix is blown. Initiate Phase 2 immediately. The sound of cars pulling up the estate's long driveway reached them through the office windows. Multiple vehicles moving fast with the aggressive coordination of a planned assault. Vincent looked at Sophia with something that might have been regret. "You should have stayed invisible, Miss Chen. Now you've made yourself the most valuable target in the city." Sophia grabbed Dominic's arm as the first gunshots echoed from the estate's perimeter. The children! They ran for the stairs together, Vincent forgotten in their shared desperation to reach Marco, Isabella, and Elena before the war. Vincent had enabled finally arrived at their door. Behind them, Sophia could hear Vincent making another transmission. "The package is in the building. 3 children, 1 woman. Take them alive if possible." The children's voices called out from upstairs, not screaming, but calling Sophia's name with the trust that she would come when they needed her. Sophia and Dominic reached the children's rooms to find them huddled together in Isabella's closet, their faces frightened but determined. They had heard the gunshots and done exactly what Sophia had taught them during their statue practice, found a safe hidden space and stayed quiet until help arrived. "Sophia," Elena whispered as soon as she saw her, "we stayed still just like you taught us." "You were perfect," Sophia said, gathering all 3 children against her. "Now we're going to play a different game. We're going to get out of here very quietly, and we're going to stay together no matter what." Marco looked at his father with the serious eyes of a child who understood that some games were matters of life and death. "Papa, are the bad men here for us?" Dominic knelt beside his son, his face a mask of calm determination. "They're here because they made a mistake, Marco. They think we're weak. We're going to show them how wrong they are." Sophia looked at this man who was preparing to fight for his children's lives, and at 3 brave children who were using their voices to stay connected in the face of terror, and realised that Vincent had been fundamentally wrong about one thing. This family wasn't weak. They were stronger than ever, and they were about to prove it. The emergency protocol Sophia had designed 3 weeks ago saved their lives. She'd called it the museum game, a system of hand signals and predetermined safe routes disguised as educational play. While Dominic's security team had been focused on perimeter defences and electronic surveillance, Sophia had been teaching 3 children how to navigate their own house like invisible shadows. "Museum voices," Sophia whispered as they crept down the servants' staircase, using the code phrase that meant absolute silence. The children understood immediately. Marco took Elena's hand. Isabella pressed close to Sophia's side. Their breathing became shallow, controlled, nearly inaudible. Behind them, gunfire erupted through the estate's main floor. The Moretti assault team had breached the front entrance with the kind of overwhelming force that suggested they knew exactly how many security personnel Dominic employed and where they would be positioned. Vincent's intelligence had been thorough. Sophia guided the children through passages that most adults in the house had forgotten existed. Service corridors built in the 1920s when wealthy families employed dozens of servants who were expected to move invisibly through their employers' lives. The children followed her with perfect trust, their newly found voices held in check by training that had seemed like games but was now proving to be survival skills. They reached the kitchen as Sophia heard Dominic's voice shouting orders from somewhere above them. His words were in rapid Italian, but the tone was unmistakable. Tactical commands delivered with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed under fire. "Sophia," Elena whispered, tugging on her sleeve. "The bad men upstairs. They're looking for us." Sophia nodded grimly. She could hear boots on hardwood floors, doors being kicked open, furniture overturned in systematic searches. The Morettis weren't just here to eliminate Dominic. They were specifically hunting for the children and for her. Vincent's final transmission echoed in her memory. "The package is in the building. 3 children, 1 woman. Take them alive if possible." They wanted hostages, leverage. The children's voices, which had been their triumph, were now their greatest vulnerability. "We're going to the garage," Sophia said quietly. "Stay behind me, hold hands, and if anyone sees us who isn't Papa, you run to the safe room and lock the door. Understood?" 3 small nods. Marco squeezed Elena's hand tighter. Isabella moved to Sophia's other side, positioning herself to protect her younger siblings. They had almost reached the garage when Sophia heard it, a sound that made her blood turn to ice water. Screaming. Not adult screaming, not the shouts of men in combat, but the high-pitched terror of a child in mortal fear. Except the screaming was coming from upstairs, where she had just left all 3 Torino children safely hidden in the closet. Sophia's mind raced through the implications. The Morettis had found decoys, children's recordings perhaps, or some other audio deception designed to draw the assault team away from their real targets. But the screaming was so realistic, so viscerally terrifying, that even she felt compelled to abandon her escape plan and race toward the sound. "Clever," said a voice behind them. Sophia spun around to find Michael Moretti himself, standing in the kitchen doorway, flanked by 2 armed men. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of expensive casual wear that suggested he'd dressed for an evening's entertainment rather than a home invasion. "The crying children upstairs," he continued conversationally. "Very convincing audio system. I assume you set that up, Miss Chen? You do seem to have a talent for understanding how children think." Sophia stepped in front of Marco, Isabella, and Elena, her arms spread wide to shield them. The children pressed against her back, their small bodies trembling but silent. "What do you want?" Sophia asked. "I want a demonstration," Michael said. "Vincent has been telling us for months that these children are becoming soft, talkative, emotionally vulnerable. He's convinced that their therapeutic progress makes them ideal leverage against their father." He gestured to one of his men, who produced a tablet computer and began setting it up on the kitchen island. "Video call," Michael explained. "Their father is currently barricaded in his office with the remainder of his security team. I'd like him to see his children demonstrate just how much they've learned to trust you." Sophia's stomach clenched. This wasn't just kidnapping. This was psychological warfare designed to break Dominic by using his children's recovered voices as weapons against him. "They're not going to perform for you," Sophia said. "Oh, I think they will." Michael's smile was cold and calculating. Children who have learned to speak are children who can be made to scream, and children who trust adults are children who will do what they're told to protect the adults they love. He nodded to his second man, who moved toward Elena with predatory intent. That was when Sophia's restaurant training kicked in. 8 years of working in professional kitchens had taught her that knives were tools, not weapons, until they needed to be weapons. Her hand closed around the handle of Giuseppe's favourite chef's knife, a 10-inch German steel blade that could julienne vegetables or carve through bone with equal efficiency. "Step away from them," Sophia said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that had managed difficult customers and diffused kitchen confrontations for nearly a decade. Michael laughed. "Miss Chen, you're a waitress. I'm a professional soldier. This isn't going to end well for you." "You're right," Sophia agreed. "I'm a waitress, which means I know how to work efficiently under pressure, handle multiple tasks simultaneously, and never waste motion." She moved. The knife flew from her hand with the precision of someone who had spent years throwing dinner plates across crowded kitchens to waiting servers. It embedded itself in the shoulder of the man approaching Elena, spinning him around and sending his weapon clattering across the marble floor. Before Michael could react, Sophia had grabbed the heavy cast-iron skillet from the stovetop and brought it down on the wrist of his second gunman. Bones cracked, his pistol hit the ground. The children scattered exactly as Sophia had taught them, not randomly, but to predetermined positions that maximised their safety while giving Sophia room to fight. Marco dove behind the kitchen island. Isabella grabbed Elena and pulled her toward the pantry. All 3 children moved with the fluid precision of a choreographed dance, their terror channeled into tactical thinking. Michael drew his own weapon, but Sophia was already inside his reach, using techniques she'd learned in foster care when fighting was survival and losing meant worse than death. The skillet connected with his gun hand. The pistol spun away across the floor. Michael stumbled backward, his face shifting from smug confidence to genuine alarm. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he snarled. "Actually," Sophia said, advancing on him with the skillet raised like a medieval mace, "I know exactly what I'm dealing with. A man who threatens children because he's too weak to face their father directly." She swung the skillet in a wide arc that caught Michael across the side of his head. He dropped like a stone, unconscious before he hit the marble floor. Silence fell over the kitchen, broken only by the sound of Sophia's harsh breathing and the distant gunfire that suggested Dominic's counterattack was underway. "Sophia!" Eleanor's voice called from the pantry. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," Sophia called back, her voice remarkably steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "You can come out now." The children emerged from their hiding places, their faces pale but determined. They looked at the unconscious men scattered around their kitchen, at Sophia standing over Michael Moretti with a cast-iron skillet in her hands, and their expressions shifted from fear to something that looked like awe. "You protected us," Marco said, his voice filled with wonder. "You fought for us," Isabella added. "Like a mama bear," Elena finished, and there was fierce pride in her small voice. Sophia felt tears sting her eyes. These children had just witnessed violence in their own home, had been threatened by armed men, had seen her commit acts that would give most adults nightmares. And their primary emotion wasn't fear, it was gratitude. They understood, with the clarity that only children possess, that sometimes love requires violence, sometimes protection demands aggression, sometimes the people who care for you must be willing to become dangerous for your sake. "Are the bad men going to wake up?" Marco asked, prodding Michael's unconscious form with his toe. "Eventually," Sophia said, "but they're not going to hurt anyone when they do." She was tying Michael's hands with kitchen twine when Dominic burst through the service door, his face wild with desperation and relief. He was followed by two of his security men, both bearing the kind of superficial wounds that suggested recent combat. "Sophia, children!" Dominic's voice cracked with emotion as he took in the scene, his 3 children safe and unharmed, Sophia standing guard over 3 incapacitated attackers, and not a scratch on anyone who mattered. "Papa!" All 3 children ran to him at once, their voices bright with excitement rather than trauma. "Sophia saved us! She threw a knife and hit the bad man, and then she used the big pan like a sword." She was like a superhero, Eleanor added, but scarier. Dominic looked at Sophia over his children's heads, and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Not just gratitude, not just relief, but recognition. He was seeing her clearly for the first time, not as the gentle caregiver who had healed his children's voices, but as the fierce protector who would kill to keep them safe. "The main assault team?" Sophia asked. "Neutralized," Dominic replied. "Vincent's intelligence was detailed, but it was also 3 weeks old. We'd been rotating security protocols since you arrived." He moved closer to her, close enough that she could see the cuts on his face, the tear in his expensive shirt, the way his hands shook slightly with the aftershocks of combat adrenaline. "You saved them," he said quietly. "They saved themselves," Sophia replied. "They remembered their training, they stayed calm, they worked as a team. I just provided tactical support." Dominic's laugh was rough with emotion. "Tactical support? Is that what we're calling it when someone takes out 3 armed men with kitchen equipment?" "Papa," Isabella interrupted, tugging on his jacket. Sophia wasn't scary when she was fighting. She was still Sophia. She just became more Sophia. Out of the mouths of babes, Sophia thought. The child had perfectly captured what Sophia was only beginning to understand about herself. She hadn't become someone else in the crisis. She had simply become more fully who she had always been. A protector, a survivor, someone who would do whatever was necessary to keep the people she loved safe. "More Sophia," Dominic repeated, and the way he said her name made something warm unfurl in her chest, despite the chaos surrounding them. The sound of sirens in the distance suggested that clean-up crews were arriving, that the immediate danger was past. that the Torino family had survived Vincent's betrayal and Michael Moretti's assault. But as Sophia looked at Dominic's face, at the way he was watching her with something that looked like wonder, she realized that the most dangerous part of the evening was just beginning. Because the man looking at her wasn't just grateful, he wasn't just relieved, he was looking at her like he'd found something he hadn't known he was searching for, and Sophia was beginning to suspect that she was looking at him the same way. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, with unconscious enemies at her feet and 3 chattering children recounting her heroics, Sophia understood that she had crossed a line she could never uncross. She wasn't just the children's caregiver anymore. She wasn't just Dominic's employee. She was family. And in Dominic Torino's world, family was everything and everyone worth fighting for. The phone call came at 4:17 in the morning. Sophia woke to the sound of Dominic's voice, low and urgent, speaking in rapid Italian from his office down the hall. She could hear the controlled fury beneath his words, the kind of deadly calm that preceded systematic vengeance. Beside her in the king-sized bed, 3 small bodies stirred restlessly. After the evening's violence, none of the children had wanted to sleep alone. They had arranged themselves around Sophia like protective talismans, Marco on her left, Elena curled against her right side, Isabella sprawled across the foot of the bed with the sprawling confidence of a child who had watched her chosen mother defeat armed men with kitchen equipment. "Sophia?" Marco's whisper was barely audible in the pre-dawn darkness. "Is Papa talking to the bad men?" "No, sweetheart," Sophia murmured, smoothing his dark hair away from his forehead. "Papa is making sure there won't be any more bad men." It was a careful truth. The emergency response after Michael Moretti's failed assault had been swift and comprehensive. Police, paramedics, federal agents, and several men in expensive suits who spoke with Dominic in coded language about territorial adjustments and permanent solutions. Sophia had answered questions for 3 hours, her story carefully edited to emphasize self-defense and protection of minors while omitting the more complex realities of Vincent's betrayal and the surveillance equipment she'd discovered. By the time the last official had left the estate, it was nearly midnight, and the children had been clinging to both Sophia and Dominic with the desperate intensity of survivors. Now, listening to Dominic's voice through the walls, Sophia understood that the evening's violence had been only the beginning. Isabella stirred at the foot of the bed, her voice thick with sleep. "Are we safe now, Sophia?" "You're safe," Sophia promised, and meant it with every fibre of her being. "You're always going to be safe." It was a promise that would have been impossible to make 12 hours ago. But something fundamental had shifted during the kitchen confrontation. Sophia had crossed a line from caregiver to protector, from employee to family member, from invisible to absolutely essential. She belonged to these children now, and they belonged to her. The sound of Dominic's office door opening carried down the hallway, followed by his footsteps approaching the bedroom. Sophia carefully extracted herself from the tangle of sleeping children and slipped out to meet him, closing the door softly behind her. Dominic stood in the hallway wearing jeans and a t-shirt, his usually immaculate appearance rumpled by exhaustion and stress. But his dark eyes were alert, calculating, and when he looked at Sophia, she saw something that made her pulse quicken. Hunger. Not just physical attraction, though that was certainly present, but something deeper. Recognition. Partnership. The kind of profound connection that developed between people who had fought together and won. "The Moretti problem has been resolved," he said quietly. Sophia understood the euphemism. Michael Moretti would not be threatening anyone's children ever again. "Vincent?" she asked. "Disappeared sometime during the assault. His phone and financial records suggest he fled to somewhere without extradition treaties." Dominic's expression was grim. "He's alive, but he's no longer my problem. The Morettis were the immediate threat." "And now?" Dominic moved closer, close enough that Sophia could see the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, the small cut on his cheekbone that someone would need to tend, the way his hands shook slightly with the aftershocks of violence and adrenaline. Now we rebuild, he said. New security protocols, new personnel, new routines that account for the fact that my children are no longer silent and my... He paused, searching for the right word. My partner is no longer invisible. Partner, not employee, not caregiver. Partner. Dominic, Sophia began, but he stepped closer, cutting off her words with the intensity of his presence. You killed for them tonight, he said softly. You put yourself between my children and armed men. You used your knowledge of their routines and their trust in you to save their lives. Anyone would have... No. His voice was firm, absolute. Anyone would have called for help. Anyone would have tried to negotiate. Anyone would have prioritized their own safety over 3 children they'd known for a month. He reached out and touched her face, his fingers tracing the line of her cheek with reverent gentleness. You're not anyone, Sophia. You're the woman who gave my children back their voices and then used your own hands to make sure they'd live long enough to keep using them. The hallway felt charged with electricity, with unspoken possibilities and the kind of tension that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with recognition. Sophia could feel herself standing at the edge of another threshold, another irrevocable choice. The children, she started, are asleep, Dominic finished, safe, protected, dreaming about the woman who fought 3 armed men to keep them from harm. His thumb traced across her lower lip, and Sophia felt her breath catch. I've been thinking, he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and something deeper, about what Isabella said earlier, about you becoming more Sophia when you fought for them. What about it? I think she's right. I think tonight you became who you were always meant to be. His dark eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her feel transparent. The question is, what do you want to do with that knowledge? Sophia looked at this man, dangerous, powerful, devoted father, criminal and protector in equal measure, and realised that her answer had been inevitable since the moment she'd first seen his children's silent faces in the restaurant. I want to stay, she said, not as an employee, not as a temporary solution to a crisis. I want to stay as whatever you need me to be. Dominic's smile was slow and devastating, transforming his austere features into something that made Sophia understand why dangerous men were irresistible to women who should know better. I need you to be exactly what you already are, he said, the woman who sees what others miss, who protects what matters, who turns silence into voices and invisible people into family. He leaned closer, and Sophia could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the expensive cologne that had been overlaid with gunpowder and adrenaline and the metallic scent of recent violence. I need you to be my partner, he said, in every sense of the word. Sophia's breath caught as she understood what he was offering. Not just a relationship, not just a position in his household, but true partnership. Equal standing in decisions that affected the children, the business, the family's future, the kind of trust that came with terrible responsibility and absolute commitment. Yes, she whispered. Dominic's kiss was fierce and gentle at the same time, tasting of desperation and relief and the kind of passion that developed between people who had been through fire together. Sophia melted into him, her hands fisting in his t-shirt, her body responding to the promise in his touch. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Sophia could see her own transformation reflected in his eyes. She was no longer the exhausted waitress who had walked into Lucia Rossetti's bistro 5 months ago. She was no longer the invisible woman who counted tips and worried about rent. She was Sophia Centorino, though the name change was still theoretical. Mother to 3 children who weren't biologically hers, but belonged to her heart. Partner to a man whose world was dangerous but whose love was absolute. Protector of a family that had chosen her as fiercely as she had chosen them. There's something you should know, Dominic said, his forehead resting against hers. The children have been drawing pictures of our wedding for the past 2 weeks, very detailed pictures. Isabella has designed the dress, Marco has planned the music, and Elena has created a menu that consists entirely of ice cream and pancakes. Sophia laughed, the sound bright and unguarded in the pre-dawn hallway. Have they now? They have opinions about the guest list too. Apparently your grandmother is required to wear the pretty red dress, and I'm supposed to cry happy tears like in the movies. And what do you think about their plans? Dominic's smile was soft, vulnerable, completely different from the controlled mask he showed the rest of the world. I think they're the smartest children in San Francisco, and I think we should probably make their dreams come true before they decide to take matters into their own hands. From inside the bedroom came the sound of small voices whispering in the conspiracy-laden tones that meant the children were awake and plotting something. "Sophia," Elena's voice called through the door, "are you and Papa having important grown-up conversations about wedding dresses?" "Because we have suggestions," Marco added. "Very important suggestions," Isabella finished. Sophia and Dominic looked at each other and burst into laughter. The kind of exhausted, euphoric laughter that came after surviving impossible odds and discovering that everything you thought you wanted was exactly what you already had. "We should go back in there," Sophia said. "They're going to start planning without us if we don't supervise." "In a minute," Dominic said, pulling her closer. "I want to remember this moment, the first time I kissed my partner, the last time I had to wonder whether you'd stay." Sophia looked at his face, scarred from tonight's battle, exhausted from months of worry, transformed by hope into something beautiful and fierce and completely hers. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, "ever. You're stuck with me, Dominic Torino." "Good," he replied, kissing her once more before opening the bedroom door to face 3 small conspirators who had apparently been waiting for this exact moment for weeks. "Because we have a wedding to plan, and our event coordinators have very specific ideas about everything, from flowers to music to whether the cake should be chocolate or vanilla." "Both," came the immediate chorus from the bed. "Obviously both." Sophia stepped into the room to find 3 children sitting up in bed, their faces bright with excitement and the kind of satisfied smugness that came from watching adults finally catch up to conclusions that children had reached long ago. "So," Isabella said with the authority of the oldest sister, "now that you're finally going to get married, can we start planning the babies?" "Isabella!" Sophia laughed, her face heating. "We have to actually have the wedding first." "Details," Elena said, with an imperious wave of her small hand. "Marco and I already decided that the first baby should be named Carmen if it's a girl, and Giuseppe if it's a boy. You know, to honour important people." Sophia felt her eyes fill with tears. These children had just included their deceased mother and their beloved chef in their family expansion plans, weaving the memory of love lost into the promise of love growing. They understood, with the wisdom that only children possessed, that families weren't diminished by adding new love. They were enhanced by it. As Sophia settled back into bed with 3 chattering wedding planners and one man whose arms felt like the safest place on earth, she realised that Isabella had been right all along. She hadn't become a different person tonight. She had just become more Sophia, more protective, more fierce, more willing to fight for what mattered, more capable of love than she had ever imagined, more ready to be exactly who these 4 people needed her to be: wife, mother, partner, protector, and the woman who had turned their silence into the most beautiful sound in the world, the sound of family, choosing each other every single day.